Tonight, we begin a journey that will carry you deep into rest and plant seeds of profound peace in your mind. There is nothing you need to accomplish here. These are not lessons or techniques to memorize. They are ancient truths that gently guide you back to the peace that has always lived within you. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The wisdom of Zen teaches us that peace is not something we must create. It is something we must uncover. Like a clear mountain lake that becomes muddy when stirred, our minds become clouded when we struggle and grasp. As we journey together through these timeless teachings, you may find your breathing naturally deepening, your body naturally relaxing. This is not something you need to force. It is the natural response of a mind that finally understands its true nature. There is nowhere else you need to be right now. Nothing else you need to do. Simply breathe with me as we begin this gentle path into rest. In a remote mountain monastery, there lived a master named Kosen, who was renowned throughout the region for his vast collection of ancient texts. For over 40 years, he had carefully gathered the rarest Buddhist scriptures, philosophical treatises, and poetry from across the land. Scholars would travel for weeks just to study in his library, which contained treasures that existed nowhere else in the world. The library itself was a work of art. Wooden shelves carved by master craftsmen reached from floor to ceiling. Each scroll was wrapped in silk and stored with meticulous care. The room smelled of cedar and aged paper, and morning light filtered through paper windows, casting a golden glow over centuries of accumulated wisdom. Kosen would spend his early hours each day in this sacred space, reading by candlelight before the other monks awakened. One autumn night, while the community slept, a terrible fire swept through the monastery. The flames, fed by strong mountain winds, moved with frightening speed. The monks managed to escape safely, but there was no time to save anything else. They stood in the courtyard watching helplessly as their home was consumed. The library burned with particular intensity. All those ancient texts, irreplaceable manuscripts, and precious scrolls turned to ash in minutes. 40 years of careful collecting vanished in a single night. As dawn broke over the smoldering ruins, the monks gathered around their teacher, expecting to find him devastated by this immense loss. Instead, they found Kosen sitting calmly on a stone, watching smoke rise from where his beloved library had stood. His face showed no trace of anger, grief, or regret. One young monk, unable to contain his confusion, approached with tears in his eyes. "Master," the student said, his voice breaking, "how can you be so peaceful? All those precious teachings, all those years of work, everything is gone. Doesn't this loss break your heart?" Kosen looked at his student with eyes full of gentle compassion. "My dear friend," he said softly, "those books contained wonderful words about truth, but they were not truth itself. The real Dharma was never written on paper or stored on shelves. It lives here," he touched his chest, and here he gestured to his student's heart. "Fire cannot burn what is truly precious." The young monk persisted. "But Master, think of all the wisdom that is lost forever. Future generations will never be able to read those texts." Kosen smiled peacefully. "The fire has given us a great teaching. It has shown us the difference between the finger pointing at the moon and the moon itself. We spent so much time polishing and protecting the finger that we sometimes forgot to look at what it was pointing toward." He stood slowly and placed a gentle hand on the young monk's shoulder. Yesterday I was the keeper of books. Today I am simply a teacher. Yesterday I worried about preserving old wisdom. Today I am free to embody it directly. The fire has not taken anything away. It has revealed what was always here. Over the following days, as the community began rebuilding, something remarkable happened. Without the distraction of managing and protecting his vast collection, Kosen's teaching became more direct and powerful than ever before. Students who had traveled expecting to study ancient texts instead encountered a living embodiment of the wisdom those texts had tried to capture. The master had discovered that his attachment to preserving the Dharma had, in subtle ways, prevented him from fully expressing it. The fire had freed him from being a curator of truth and allowed him to become truth itself. This story illuminates something profound about the nature of acceptance in Zen practice. True acceptance is not about liking what happens to us. Kosen did not celebrate the fire or pretend he was happy about losing his library. Instead, he accepted the reality of what had occurred and opened himself to whatever wisdom it might contain. In Zen, we learn that resistance to what has already happened is the source of our deepest suffering. We waste precious energy fighting battles that were already won or lost. When we stop this futile struggle against reality, we discover an inner freedom that no external circumstance can touch. The fire in this story represents all the unexpected losses and changes that life brings us. Sometimes it burns away our cherished plans, our familiar identities, or our treasured possessions. Our first instinct is to see these events as tragedies, as enemies of our happiness. But Zen teaches us to look deeper. What if every loss is also a liberation? What if what burns away was only binding us? Kosen discovered that his attachment to preserving wisdom had become an obstacle to embodying it. The fire freed him from being a keeper of truth and allowed him to become truth itself. This teaching extends to every area of our lives. When we lose a job we thought defined us, we might discover talents we never knew we had. When a relationship ends, we might find a capacity for solitude and self-reliance that strengthens us. When illness limits our physical abilities, we might develop inner resources that are far more valuable. The practice of acceptance begins with a simple recognition. What has already happened has already happened. Our resistance cannot change the past, but our acceptance can transform our future. When we stop fighting what is, we become available to what might be. Take another gentle breath now. Feel how your body naturally relaxes when you stop bracing against imaginary threats. This is the physical sensation of acceptance. Not collapse, but a wise yielding that conserves your energy for what truly matters. Let us now turn to another story that reveals how acceptance can transform even our relationship with imperfection itself. There was once a young student named Daiki who came to study at a mountain monastery known for its exquisite gardens. He had always been drawn to beauty and perfection, and he hoped that learning to tend these famous gardens would bring him closer to enlightenment. He imagined spending his days among perfectly arranged flowers, geometrically precise pathways, and trees pruned into ideal forms. On his first morning, the head gardener, an elderly monk named Soshin, led Daiki on a tour of the grounds. They walked through sections of remarkable beauty where everything seemed to grow in perfect harmony. Cherry trees formed elegant arches over stone pathways. Moss-covered rocks in patterns that looked almost intentional. Streams flowed with gentle musical sounds over carefully placed stones. But as they continued their walk, they came to a section that seemed forgotten or neglected. Here, plants grew wild and seemingly random. Weeds pushed up between stones. Branches grew in odd directions. At the center of this unkempt area stood an ancient pine tree that had been twisted and bent by decades of mountain storms. Its trunk curved in 3 directions, its branches reached out at strange angles, and its bark was scarred and weathered. Daiki looked at the tree with obvious distaste. "Master Soshin," he said, "surely this old tree mars the beauty of your garden. Why don't you remove it and plant something more pleasing? Something that grows straight and strong like the other pines?" Soshin stopped walking and gazed at the twisted tree with obvious affection. "This tree," he said quietly, "is my greatest teacher. It has shown me something that all the perfect specimens could never reveal." Daiki looked confused. What could this damaged tree possibly teach that a healthy one cannot? The old gardener walked closer to the twisted pine and placed his weathered hand gently on its gnarled bark. "This tree has been here for over 200 years. It has survived storms that destroyed younger, straighter trees. It has bent without breaking, adapted without losing its essential nature. Every curve in its trunk tells a story of resilience. Every twisted branch speaks of creative response to difficulty." He looked at his young student with eyes full of warmth. "The straight trees in the formal garden are beautiful, yes. But their beauty is dependent on perfect conditions. They must be protected from strong winds, given ideal soil, pruned regularly to maintain their shape. This old pine has found its own way to be beautiful despite imperfect conditions. Perhaps because of them." Soshin led Daiki to a stone bench facing the tree and invited him to sit. "For the next week," he said, "I want you to spend 1 hour each morning simply sitting with this tree. Don't try to fix it or improve it. Don't judge it or wish it were different. Simply be present with it as its island." Daiki felt disappointed. He had come to learn about creating beauty, not contemplating what he saw as an eyesore. But he trusted his teacher and agreed to the practice. The first morning was difficult. Daiki sat reluctantly, his mind filled with criticism. The tree looked broken to him, a symbol of everything that goes wrong when things are not properly maintained. He spent most of the hour planning how the garden could be improved once this unsightly specimen was removed. But as the days passed, something began to shift in his perception. On the 3rd morning, he noticed how the morning light caught the deep grooves in the bark, creating patterns of shadow and illumination that were unexpectedly beautiful. On the 4th day, he saw how a small bird had built its nest in one of the tree's twisted branches, using the unusual angles for protection and support. By the end of the week, Daiki found himself looking forward to his morning time with the tree. He began to see that its twisted form was not a failure to grow properly, but a masterpiece of adaptation. Every bend and curve was the tree's creative response to the particular challenges it had faced. No straight tree could tell such a rich story of survival and resilience. On the final morning, as Daiki sat in his usual spot, Soshin joined him. "What has the tree taught you?" the old master asked. Daiki was quiet for a long moment before responding. "It has taught me that there are different kinds of beauty. The formal gardens are beautiful like a perfect poem, but this tree is beautiful like a wise face that shows its history. I came here wanting to learn how to make things perfect, but the tree has shown me how to find perfection in things as they are." Soshin nodded approvingly. "The tree grows according to its nature and circumstances. It doesn't try to be a different tree." It simply responds to each moment with authenticity. This is the deepest teaching of Zen. Not to force ourselves or our world into predetermined shapes, but to find the natural perfection that emerges when we stop fighting what island. This story reveals another layer of acceptance that is crucial to Zen understanding. We often think acceptance means tolerating what we don't like. But true acceptance goes deeper. It means discovering that what we initially resist may contain exactly the wisdom or beauty we need. Daiki's journey from criticism to appreciation mirrors our own process of learning to accept not just external circumstances, but aspects of ourselves that we judge as flawed or inadequate. Like the twisted pine, we all carry scars from the storms we have weathered. We all have aspects of our personality or history that don't match our ideal self-image. Zen teaches us that these apparent imperfections are not obstacles to our awakening. They are the very material from which awakening emerges. Our struggles become our strength. Our wounds become sources of compassion. Our limitations become doorways to creativity and resourcefulness. The twisted tree survived storms that destroyed straighter trees precisely because it learned to bend. In the same way, our capacity to accept and work with our imperfections often makes us more resilient and authentic than those who have never been tested by difficulty. This teaching transforms how we relate to everything in our lives that seems less than ideal. The difficult relationship that teaches us patience, the health challenge that shows us what truly matters, the failure that redirects us toward our genuine path. When we stop demanding that life conform to our preferences, we become available to receive its actual gifts. The practice of this deeper acceptance begins with curiosity rather than judgment. When you encounter something in yourself or your circumstances that you want to change, pause first. Ask what this situation might be teaching you. How might it be perfectly suited to your growth, even if not to your preferences? This doesn't mean becoming passive or avoiding all effort to improve conditions. The gardener still tends his formal gardens with care and skill. But he also appreciates the wild beauty that emerges when nature is allowed to follow its own wisdom. As you rest now, feel into this teaching. Notice any areas of your life where you have been fighting what is, demanding that reality conform to your expectations. What would it feel like to approach these situations with the curiosity and appreciation that Daiki learned to bring to the twisted tree? Breathe gently and let this wisdom settle into your body like nourishing rain soaking into earth. Tomorrow's challenges will still be there, but you need not meet them with resistance. You can meet them with the flexible strength of the ancient pine, bending without breaking, finding your own authentic way to thrive. Let yourself rest in this understanding. Acceptance is not giving up. It is the foundation for all genuine transformation. When we stop fighting reality, we become available to dance with it. And in this dance, we discover possibilities we could never have imagined when we were struggling against the current. Sleep comes naturally to a mind that has learned to accept what island. Rest deeply, knowing that you are perfectly positioned to receive whatever teachings tomorrow brings. A young monk named Jiro lived in a monastery nestled high in the mountains where the air was thin and crystal clear. Every morning before dawn, he would walk down a winding stone path to collect water from a natural spring. The path was treacherous, with loose rocks and steep drops on one side, but Jiro had made this journey hundreds of times. One morning, as he carefully made his way down the mountain, he noticed something glinting in the early light. Half buried beneath a fallen log was a small, perfectly smooth river stone. But this was no ordinary stone. It seemed to glow with an inner light, and its surface was marked with natural patterns that looked almost like ancient writing. Jiro picked up the stone and felt a strange warmth spread through his hands. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Surely this was a sign, a gift from the universe meant specifically for him. He tucked the stone carefully into his robe and continued to the spring. Over the following days, Jiro found himself constantly touching the stone in his pocket. During meditation, he would hold it secretly in his palm. While working in the garden, he would check to make sure it was still safe in his robes. At meals, he would feel for its reassuring weight. The stone began to occupy more and more of his thoughts. He would lie awake at night, wondering about its origins. Was it truly magical? Did it have special powers? He started to believe that his meditation was deeper when he held it, that his work went more smoothly when it was near. But with this attachment came worry. What if he lost it? What if someone discovered it and tried to take it away? Jiro began taking longer routes to avoid other monks. He started checking his pocket dozens of times each day. The very thing that had initially brought him joy now filled him with constant anxiety. One morning, as Jiro hurried along the mountain path with his water buckets, his foot caught on a loose stone. He stumbled and fell hard, water splashing everywhere. As he scrambled to collect the scattered buckets, he heard a small sound that made his heart stop. The gentle clink of stone striking rock. His precious stone had fallen from his robes and was now rolling toward the cliff edge. Jiro lunged after it desperately, but he was too late. The stone tumbled over the precipice and disappeared into the misty valley far below. Jiro sat on the rocky path, staring at the spot where his treasure had vanished. All his careful guarding had meant nothing. In a single moment, what he had held most dear was gone forever. He expected to feel devastated, but instead, something unexpected happened. A wave of relief washed over him. The constant worry was gone. The need to protect and check and hide had vanished with the stone. For the first time in weeks, his mind felt clear and spacious. He realized that in trying so hard to hold on to the stone, he had lost something far more valuable: his peace of mind. As Jiro walked back up the mountain path with his empty buckets, he felt lighter than he had in months. The stone had been beautiful, but the anxiety it brought had made his life smaller and more fearful. Now, with empty pockets and an open heart, he could see the real magic that had always been there. The morning mist dancing between the peaks. The sound of his own footsteps on ancient stone. The simple rhythm of breathing mountain air. That evening, Jiro went to his teacher and told him the whole story. The master listened quietly, nodding with understanding. "The stone taught you something precious," the teacher said. "But the lesson was not in keeping it. The lesson was in losing it. You discovered that your happiness was never in the stone itself. It was in your ability to appreciate beauty when you encountered it. That ability cannot fall off a cliff. It goes wherever you go." The teacher smiled gently. We think we need to possess the things we love. But possession turns love into fear. When you truly love something, you can let it be free. And in that freedom, both you and what you love find peace. This simple story reveals one of the most transformative teachings in all of Buddhist wisdom. We suffer not because we love things, but because we try to own them. The moment we grasp tightly to anything, whether it's an object, a person, an experience, or even an idea, we plant the seeds of our own anxiety. Jiro's experience shows us something profound about the nature of attachment. The stone itself was not the problem. Beauty is meant to be appreciated. Joy is meant to be felt. But when appreciation becomes possession, when joy becomes clinging, we lose the very thing we were trying to keep. The stone brought Jiro happiness when he first found it, but that happiness disappeared the moment he decided he had to keep it forever. This teaching transforms how we relate to everything we cherish. Our relationships become more loving when we stop trying to control them. Our experiences become richer when we stop demanding they last forever. Our possessions bring more joy when we hold them lightly, appreciating them while we have them and releasing them gracefully when the time comes. The deepest peace comes not from getting what we want and keeping it forever, but from learning to want what we have and let it go when it's time. This is not about becoming cold or indifferent. It's about loving so completely that we want what's best for whatever we love, even if that means letting it follow its own path. Breathe gently now and feel how this understanding settles in your body. Notice how even thinking about letting go creates a sense of spaciousness, like setting down a heavy pack you've been carrying for miles. Let us explore this wisdom further through another story, one that shows how letting go can transform not just our relationship with things, but our relationship with ourselves. Master Eishin was known throughout the region as the most skilled calligrapher in generations. People would travel for days to commission a piece of his work, and his scrolls were treasured by collectors and temples alike. His brushstrokes seemed to flow directly from some divine source, creating characters of extraordinary beauty and power. Eishin took great pride in his art. He would spend hours preparing his ink to the perfect consistency, selecting brushes with the ideal flexibility, and waiting for precisely the right mental state before beginning any important piece. His studio was arranged with meticulous care, every tool in its proper place. One spring morning, a wealthy merchant commissioned Eishin to create a scroll for his daughter's wedding. It was to be the most important piece Eishin had ever attempted, worthy of the substantial payment offered. The merchant requested specific characters, meaning eternal happiness, in Eishin's most elaborate style. Eishin prepared for days. He fasted to purify his mind, meditated to calm his spirit, and practiced the characters hundreds of times on ordinary paper. When he finally felt ready, he laid out his finest silk scroll, prepared his most precious ink, and selected his most beloved brush. As he began the first character, something felt perfect. His hand moved with fluid grace, the ink flowed like liquid silk, and the character emerged with stunning beauty. Eishin's heart swelled with satisfaction. This would be his masterpiece, the piece that would establish his reputation for generations. But as he moved to the second character, disaster struck. A sudden gust of wind through the open window knocked over his water bowl. The water splashed across the scroll, creating a large dark stain right through the center of his perfect first character. Eishin stared at the ruined scroll in horror. Weeks of preparation destroyed in an instant. The silk was expensive and rare, the commission was crucial for his reputation, and worst of all, the perfect character he had created was now completely destroyed. His first impulse was to rage at the wind, at his carelessness in leaving the window open, at the cruel timing of the accident. He could try to clean the scroll, but the damage was irreversible. He could start over, but he had no more silk of this quality, and the merchant expected the piece within days. As Aishin sat staring at the damaged scroll, feeling his dreams of the perfect masterpiece crumble, something shifted in his perspective. He looked more closely at the water stain. It had created an organic, flowing shape that seemed to complement the partial character rather than destroy it. The stain had its own beauty, like a cloud formation or a mountain silhouette. Instead of throwing the scroll away, Aishin picked up his brush again. He began to work with the accident rather than against it. He incorporated the water stain into his design, using it as the foundation for an entirely different kind of composition. Where he had planned formal perfection, he now created something wild and spontaneous. The characters he painted around and through the stain had a freedom and energy unlike anything he had ever produced. Instead of trying to control every brushstroke, he let his hand respond to what was already on the silk. The accident became a partner in creation rather than an enemy of it. When Aishin finished, he had created something far more beautiful than his original plan. The piece had life and movement that his careful, controlled work had never achieved. The water stain, which had seemed like complete disaster, had freed him from his perfectionism and allowed his true artistic spirit to emerge. The merchant was amazed when he saw the finished work. "Master Aishin," he said, "I have seen many examples of your art, but this is beyond anything you have created before. How did you achieve such spontaneous beauty?" Aishin smiled, remembering his initial horror at the accident. "I stopped trying to create perfection and started allowing perfection to create itself. The stain taught me that my greatest enemy was not imperfection, but my fear of it. When I let go of needing to control every detail, my art became truly alive." From that day forward, Aishin's work changed completely. He still practiced diligently and prepared carefully, but he no longer tried to force predetermined outcomes. He learned to dance with accidents, to welcome the unexpected, and to see imperfection as a doorway to deeper creativity. This story shows us how letting go transforms not just our relationship with external things, but our relationship with ourselves and our own efforts. Aishin discovered that his attachment to perfection was actually preventing him from creating truly perfect art. His fear of making mistakes was keeping him from the spontaneous beauty that emerges when we trust the natural flow of life. This teaching reaches into every corner of our lives. How often do we miss opportunities for joy because we're too focused on avoiding problems? How many relationships become strained because we try too hard to control how they unfold? How much creative energy do we waste trying to force outcomes instead of responding skillfully to what actually happens? The Buddhist path teaches us that our greatest suffering comes from fighting reality instead of flowing with it. When Aishin stopped battling the water stain and started working with it, he discovered possibilities he never could have imagined. When we stop demanding that life match our expectations and start engaging creatively with what actually shows up, we find a freedom and aliveness that no amount of control could provide. This is why letting go is so central to finding deep peace. It's not about giving up on life or becoming passive. It's about recognizing that our tight grip on how things should be often prevents us from seeing how beautiful they already are. It's about trusting that life knows something about unfolding that our worried minds cannot grasp. The peace that comes from this understanding is profound because it doesn't depend on circumstances being a certain way. Whether the stone falls off the cliff or stays in our pocket, whether the water spills on our scroll or not, we can find our way to contentment by working skillfully with whatever appears. As you rest now in this sanctuary of learning, Feel into this teaching about letting go. Notice any places in your life where you might be gripping too tightly, where your fear of loss or imperfection might be creating unnecessary tension. What would it feel like to soften that grip just a little? This is not about becoming careless or indifferent. Eishin still valued his art deeply, just as Jiro could still appreciate beauty. But when we love something without needing to possess it completely, when we care without needing to control, we discover a way of being that is both deeply engaged and profoundly peaceful. Let yourself rest in this possibility. The deepest teachings of Buddhism point toward this freedom, this ability to hold life lightly while embracing it fully. In this balance between caring and releasing, between effort and surrender, we find the peace that passes all understanding. This is the peace that allows both the body and mind to rest completely, knowing that whatever comes, we have the wisdom to meet it with an open heart. In a small village at the edge of a vast forest lived a baker named Kenji, who was known for his kind heart and generous spirit. Every morning before dawn, he would light his ovens and begin preparing fresh bread for the day. The warm smell of baking would drift through the village streets, waking people gently and filling their hearts with anticipation. Kenji had a simple practice. He would always bake a few extra loaves each day and leave them on a wooden shelf outside his shop with a small sign that read, "For those who need them." Travelers, poor families, and anyone who was hungry could take what they needed without having to ask or explain their circumstances. One harsh winter, when food was scarce and many villagers were struggling, a group of desperate men began stealing from shops and homes. They would come in the night, taking whatever they could find. The village lived in fear, and many people began locking their doors and hiding their valuables. Kenji's shop was robbed 3 times in 2 weeks. Each time, the thieves took not just the free bread from the shelf, but also money from his cash box and flour from his stores. The 3rd time, they also broke several of his baking tools and overturned his carefully organized workspace. The other villagers were outraged on Kenji's behalf. "You must stop leaving bread outside," they told him. "You're just encouraging them. Put up bars on your windows. Get a guard dog. Show these criminals that you won't be an easy target." But Kenji continued his practice. Each morning he would clean up any damage, repair what he could, and bake his bread as usual. He still left the extra loaves on the shelf outside, though now they disappeared even more quickly. One particularly cold night, Kenji was working late, preparing dough for the next day's baking. He heard a sound at his front door and saw shadows moving outside. Instead of hiding or calling for help, he did something that surprised even himself. He opened the door. 3 men stood there, their faces gaunt with hunger and their clothes torn from living rough in the winter forest. They had clearly come to steal again, but they froze when they saw Kenji looking at them directly. "You must be very hungry," Kenji said softly, "to be out on such a cold night." The men didn't know how to respond. They had expected to find the shop empty, to take what they needed, and disappear back into the darkness. They had not expected kindness. "I have fresh soup cooking," Kenji continued. "And there's warm bread just out of the oven. Would you like to come in and eat?" The oldest of the 3 men, who seemed to be their leader, looked suspicious. "Why would you help us? Don't you know who we are?" "We're the ones who've been taking from you." Kenji nodded calmly. "I know, and I can see that you take only what you need to survive. A man doesn't steal bread because he's evil. He steals bread because he's hungry. He stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. The winter is hard for everyone, but it doesn't have to make us into enemies. Slowly, cautiously, the three men entered the warm bakery. Kenji served them bowl after bowl of hot soup and all the fresh bread they could eat. As they warmed up and filled their empty stomachs, they began to talk. They had all lost their jobs when the local mine closed. With no work available and their savings gone, they had been forced to live in the forest. They had tried begging, but the villagers chased them away. Stealing seemed like their only option for survival. "We never wanted to hurt anyone," the youngest one said, his eyes filling with tears. "We just didn't want to starve." Kenji listened to their story with deep attention. When they finished eating, he made an offer that astonished them. "I could use help with the early morning baking," he said. "The work is hard and the hours are long, but there's always enough food and a warm place to sleep in the room above the shop. If you're willing to work, you're welcome to stay." The three men looked at each other in disbelief. They had come to steal from this man, and he was offering them jobs and shelter. The oldest man shook his head slowly. "Why would you trust us? We've robbed you multiple times." Kenji smiled gently. "Because I believe that people do better when they're given the chance to do better. You stole because you were desperate. But desperation isn't who you are. It's just a situation you were in." The men stayed. They worked harder than any employees Kenji had ever had, grateful beyond words for the chance to earn an honest living. Within a few months, the bakery was more prosperous than ever. The village was safer, and the former thieves had become respected members of the community. Years later, when people asked Kenji why he had chosen kindness over punishment, he would say, "Fear creates more fear. Anger creates more anger. But compassion has the power to transform even the most difficult situations. When we respond to suffering with understanding instead of judgment, we give everyone involved a chance to become better than they were before." This simple story reveals something profound about the nature of compassion in Buddhist teaching. True compassion is not just feeling sorry for others or being nice when it's easy. It's the wisdom to see that underneath every harmful action is some form of suffering, and the courage to respond to that suffering with understanding rather than punishment. Kenji understood something that the other villagers missed. The thieves were not evil people who enjoyed causing harm. They were human beings caught in desperate circumstances, acting out of pain and need rather than malice. When he responded to their actions with compassion instead of anger, he created the conditions for genuine transformation. This teaching shows us that compassion is not weakness or naivety. It's a powerful force that can change situations that seem hopeless. When we meet aggression with more aggression, we only escalate conflict. But when we can see through someone's harmful behavior to the pain that drives it, we open the door to healing for everyone involved. The deep peace that Buddhist teachings offer comes partly from this understanding. When we learn to respond to difficulty with compassion, we stop adding our own anger and fear to the world's suffering. Instead, we become agents of healing and transformation. This doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior or putting ourselves in danger. It means understanding that lasting solutions come from addressing the root causes of problems rather than just reacting to their symptoms. Take a gentle breath now and feel how this understanding settles in your heart. Notice how even thinking about responding with compassion creates a sense of spaciousness and calm, as if a tight knot in your chest has begun to loosen. Let us explore this wisdom further through another story, one that shows how compassion directed toward ourselves can be just as transformative as compassion offered to others. There was once a student named Mickey who came to study at a mountain temple known for its rigorous meditation practice. She had heard that the monks there could sit in perfect stillness for hours, their minds clear as mountain lakes, their hearts filled with boundless peace. She wanted desperately to achieve this same level of spiritual attainment. Mickey threw herself into the practice with fierce determination. She would rise at 3 a.m. to meditate before the other students awakened. She would sit through meals in silence, contemplating spiritual teachings instead of eating. She pushed herself to meditate for longer periods than anyone else, often sitting until her legs went completely numb and her back ached terribly. But instead of the peace and clarity she sought, Mickey found her mind becoming more agitated and critical than ever before. During meditation, instead of watching her thoughts with gentle awareness, she would attack each wandering thought with harsh inner criticism. Focus, she would command herself. Stop being so undisciplined. Other students can do this easily. What's wrong with you? When her meditation felt scattered, she would punish herself by skipping meals or adding extra hours of sitting. When she felt drowsy during practice, she would scold herself for being lazy and weak. Her inner dialogue became a constant stream of judgment and disappointment. After months of this harsh self-treatment, Mickey was more miserable than when she had arrived. Her body was thin from skipping meals, her mind was exhausted from constant self-criticism, and her heart felt heavy with shame about her perceived failures. One morning, after a particularly difficult meditation session where she had berated herself for every wandering thought, Mickey went to the temple's small garden to cry in private. She sat beneath a cherry tree, feeling like a complete failure as a spiritual student. Master Yuki, the temple's elderly teacher, happened to be walking through the garden. She saw Mickey's distress and sat down quietly beside her on the stone bench. "Tell me about your practice," Master Yuki said gently. Through her tears, Mickey poured out her frustration. She described her rigorous schedule, her constant self-criticism, and her disappointment in her lack of progress. "I try so hard," she sobbed, "but I'm just not good enough. I'll never be able to meditate like the other students. Maybe I should just give up." Master Yuki listened in compassionate silence. When Mickey finished, the teacher pointed to a small bird that had landed near their feet. The bird was pecking at the ground, searching for seeds and insects. "Watch this little bird," Master Yuki said. "See how naturally it moves. It doesn't criticize itself for not finding food quickly enough. It doesn't compare itself to other birds. It simply does what birds do, moment by moment, with complete acceptance of its own nature." Mickey watched the bird for several minutes, struck by its effortless presence and natural grace. "Now," Master Yuki continued, "imagine if this bird spent its time telling itself it was a terrible bird, that it should fly better or sing more beautifully. What would happen to its natural ability to find food and shelter? What would happen to its joy in simply being a bird?" Mickey understood immediately. It would be too busy criticizing itself to do what it naturally knows how to do. Master Yuki nodded. "You came here to learn peace and compassion. But the first place to practice these qualities is with yourself. How can you offer kindness to others if you show nothing but harshness to your own heart? How can you find peace in meditation if you're at war with your own mind?" The teacher's voice was filled with gentle warmth. "The path to awakening is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming kind. First to yourself, then to all beings. Your mind will wander during meditation. That's what minds do. The practice is not to stop this wandering, but to notice it with the same gentle affection you would show a beloved child who gets distracted while learning to walk. From that day forward, Miki changed her entire approach to practice. Instead of commanding her mind to focus, she would gently invite it back to the breath. Instead of criticizing wandering thoughts, she would acknowledge them with phrases like thinking or planning and return to her meditation with kindness. When her body felt tired, instead of pushing through with determination, she would adjust her posture or take a brief break, treating her physical needs with respect. When emotions arose during sitting, instead of judging them as obstacles, she would breathe with them compassionately as she might comfort a friend in distress. The transformation was remarkable. Within weeks, Miki's meditation became naturally deeper and more peaceful. Her mind, no longer under constant attack, began to settle into the stillness she had been seeking. More importantly, the harsh inner critic that had tormented her for so long gradually softened into a voice of gentle encouragement and support. Years later, Miki became known for her compassionate teaching style and her ability to help struggling students find their way to genuine peace. When asked about her approach, she would say, "I learned that the kindness we show ourselves becomes the foundation for all the kindness we offer the world. We cannot give what we do not have, and we cannot find peace through war, even when that war is with ourselves." This story illuminates one of Buddhism's most essential teachings about compassion. Before we can truly help others or find lasting peace, we must learn to treat ourselves with the same gentleness and understanding we would offer to someone we deeply love. Most of us carry an inner critic that is harsher than we would ever be to a friend, and this internal violence prevents us from accessing our natural wisdom and peace. Miki's journey shows us that self-compassion is not self-indulgence or making excuses for laziness. It's the recognition that we learn and grow more effectively in an atmosphere of kindness than in an atmosphere of constant judgment. When we stop waging war against our own imperfections, our minds naturally settle into the peace that was always there beneath the conflict. This teaching transforms everything about how we approach spiritual practice and personal growth. Instead of trying to force ourselves into enlightenment through harsh discipline, we create the conditions for awakening through gentle persistence and loving patience. Like a garden that grows better with steady care than with violent digging, our hearts and minds flourish when tended with compassion. The Buddhist path teaches us that suffering often comes from our resistance to our own experience. When Miki fought against her wandering mind, she created more suffering than the wandering thoughts themselves ever could. When she learned to accept her mental patterns with kindness, the very same mind that had seemed chaotic began to reveal its natural clarity. This understanding brings profound relief because it means we don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love and peace. We don't have to eliminate all our flaws before we can begin to help others. We simply have to learn to meet our imperfections with the same compassionate understanding that we would offer to any suffering being. As you rest in this teaching now, notice how your body responds to the idea of treating yourself with complete kindness. Feel how even the possibility of ending the inner war creates a sense of softening and relief. This is not laziness or lowering standards. This is the recognition that love is a more powerful force for transformation than fear. The compassion that begins with ourselves naturally extends outward to embrace all beings. When we stop judging our own struggles, we become more patient with the struggles of others. When we learn to forgive our own mistakes, we develop the capacity to forgive those who have hurt us. When we discover that our own suffering deserves understanding rather than punishment, we begin to see that the same is true for everyone. The deep peace that these teachings offer comes from this shift in how we meet life's difficulties. Instead of fighting against problems or judging ourselves for having them, we learn to embrace whatever arises with the tender care of a mother holding her child. In this embrace, transformation happens naturally, not through force, but through love. Let yourself rest now in this possibility. Feel what it might be like to move through tomorrow with the same kindness toward yourself that Master Yuki showed to Miki. Notice how this inner gentleness creates space for genuine wisdom and peace to emerge. This is the gift that Buddhist teachings offer, not just techniques for improvement, but a completely different way of relating to ourselves and our experience, a way that leads inevitably to the deep rest that comes when the heart finally feels safe to be at peace. There once lived a young tea merchant named Taro who traveled from village to village selling the finest teas from distant mountains. His cart was filled with carefully wrapped packages of green tea, black tea, and rare flowering teas that bloomed like flowers when steeped in hot water. Taro took great pride in his knowledge of tea and his ability to match each customer with the perfect blend for their taste. But Taro had a problem. His mind was always somewhere else. While walking through one village, he would be thinking about the next village he needed to reach. While talking to customers about tea, he would be calculating profits or worrying about the weather for tomorrow's travel. While eating his evening meal, he would be planning the next day's route or replaying conversations from earlier in the day. This constant mental activity made Taro feel tired and scattered. He would often arrive in a new village only to realize he couldn't remember anything about the journey there. He would finish conversations with customers and immediately forget their names or what they had purchased. His life felt like a blur of constant motion without any real satisfaction or peace. One evening, Taro arrived in a mountain village just as the sun was setting. He was exhausted from a long day of travel and eager to find lodging for the night. As he walked through the quiet streets pulling his cart, he noticed a small tea house with warm light glowing from its windows. Inside, an elderly woman sat alone at a low table, slowly preparing tea with careful, deliberate movements. Something about her presence caught Taro's attention. She seemed completely absorbed in what she was doing, as if nothing else in the world existed except the tea ceremony unfolding before her. Taro knocked gently and asked if he might shelter there for the night. The woman, whose name was Sachiko, welcomed him warmly and invited him to sit while she finished preparing the tea. "I am a tea merchant," Taro said, settling his tired body onto a cushion. "I have teas from all over the region. Perhaps you would like to try some of my finest varieties." Sachiko smiled gently and continued her slow, meditative movements. "Thank you for your generous offer," she said. "But first, would you join me in drinking this tea I have already prepared? It is just simple green tea, nothing fancy." Taro agreed, though he was curious to show off his premium selections. Sachiko poured the tea into small, humble clay cups and placed one before Taro. Then she lifted her own cup and took a slow, appreciative sip. Taro lifted his cup and took a quick drink, ready to comment on the quality and suggest improvements. But before he could speak, Sachiko asked quietly, "What did you taste?" The question surprised Taro. "Well, it's green tea. Decent quality, though I have much better varieties in my cart." The leaves could be picked earlier in the season for a more delicate flavor, and... No, Sachiko interrupted gently. I didn't ask you to analyze or compare. I asked what you tasted. Right now, in your mouth, what do you actually taste? Taro paused, confused. He lifted the cup again and took another sip, this time trying to focus on the actual sensations in his mouth. But his mind immediately began its familiar pattern of comparison and evaluation. Try once more, Sachiko suggested. But this time, drink as if you have never tasted tea before. As if this is the first sip of tea in your entire life. Taro found this instruction strange, but something in the woman's peaceful presence made him want to try. He lifted the cup very slowly and took the smallest possible sip. Instead of thinking about the tea, he tried to simply experience it. For the first time, he noticed the warmth spreading across his tongue. He felt the subtle astringency that made his mouth feel slightly dry. He detected a hint of sweetness that appeared after the initial bitterness faded. There was an earthy quality that reminded him of morning mist over mountain forests. Now what did you taste? Sachiko asked. I actually tasted the tea, Taro said, surprised by his own response. Not my thoughts about the tea, but the tea itself. Sachiko nodded approvingly. Most people spend their whole lives drinking tea without ever really tasting it. They are so busy thinking about the tea, comparing it to other teas, judging whether they like it or not, that they miss the direct experience of drinking. She poured him another cup. Try again. This time, also notice what it feels like to hold the warm cup in your hands. Notice the sensation of swallowing. Pay attention to the steam rising from the surface. Taro spent the next hour drinking tea with a level of attention he had never experienced before. Each sip became a small meditation. He noticed how his breathing naturally slowed when he focused completely on the present moment. His racing thoughts settled into quiet appreciation for what was actually happening right now. This is how I learned to find peace, Sachiko told him as the evening grew late. Not by changing my circumstances, but by showing up fully for whatever was already here. I have been making tea in this same simple way for 30 years, and I discover something new every single time because I am truly present for the experience. That night, Taro slept more deeply than he had in months. The next morning, as he prepared to continue his journey, he found that everything felt different. As he loaded his cart, he noticed the weight and texture of each package. As he walked through the village, he heard birds singing that he had never noticed before. The morning air felt fresh and alive against his skin. From that day forward, Taro's approach to his work completely changed. Instead of rushing through his days with his mind elsewhere, he began to practice what Sachiko had shown him. When talking with customers, he listened fully to their words instead of planning his next sales pitch. When walking from village to village, he noticed the changing landscape, the feel of his feet on the path, the rhythm of his breathing. This simple shift in attention transformed not only Taro's experience of his work, but also his success as a merchant. Customers began seeking him out because they felt truly heard and understood when they talked with him. His genuine presence made people trust him, and his careful attention helped him match each person with exactly the right tea for their needs. Years later, when people asked Taro about the secret to his peaceful contentment, he would say, "I learned that happiness is not something you find by looking elsewhere. It's something you discover by being completely where you are." This story reveals one of Buddhism's most practical and transformative teachings. The practice of mindfulness, or complete attention to the present moment. Most of us live like Taro did before his encounter with Sachiko. Our bodies are in one place, but our minds are somewhere else entirely. We eat without tasting, walk without seeing, and talk without really listening. This divided attention is a major source of suffering because it prevents us from ever feeling fully satisfied or at peace. When we're always thinking about the next thing, we miss the richness that's available right now. When our attention is scattered across past and future, we never get to rest in the simple reality of this moment. The Buddhist understanding of mindfulness is not about emptying the mind or achieving some special state of consciousness. It's about learning to be fully present for whatever is happening right now, whether that's drinking tea, having a conversation, or simply breathing. This complete attention naturally brings peace because it stops the mental restlessness that keeps us feeling unsettled and searching. Taro discovered that the same activity he had done thousands of times before, drinking tea, could become a source of deep satisfaction when he brought his full attention to it. This shows us that we don't need to change our circumstances to find peace. We need to change the quality of attention we bring to our circumstances. The practice of mindfulness transforms ordinary moments into opportunities for rest and renewal. When we eat with full attention, each meal becomes nourishing for both body and spirit. When we listen with complete presence, our relationships become deeper and more meaningful. When we bring mindful attention to any activity, it becomes a form of meditation that settles the mind naturally. Take a gentle breath now and feel what it's like to be completely present for the simple act of breathing. Notice how your mind naturally quiets when you focus entirely on what's happening right now. This is the peace that Buddhist teachings offer, not as something far away or difficult to achieve, but as the natural result of paying attention to life as it unfolds moment by moment. Let us explore this wisdom further through another story that shows how mindfulness can transform even our most challenging experiences. Master Josen was known for his ability to remain calm and centered no matter what was happening around him. Students would come from distant temples to learn from him, hoping to discover the secret of his unshakable peace. But Josen's most devoted student, a young monk named Kaku, was struggling with doubt about his teacher's reputation. Kaku had been living at the temple for 2 years, and while he found Master Josen to be wise and kind, he had never seen him face any real difficulties. The temple was peaceful, the community was harmonious, and their daily routine was predictable and serene. Kaku wondered if his teacher's calmness was simply the result of living in such ideal conditions. Anyone can be peaceful in a place like this, Kaku confided to his friend. But what would happen if Master Josen faced real problems? Would he still be so calm if his world was turned upside down? One autumn morning, Kaku's question was answered in an unexpected way. A messenger arrived at the temple with terrible news. Bandits had attacked Master Josen's home village during the night. His elderly mother and younger brother, who still lived there, had been killed in the violence. The family home where Josen had grown up had been burned to the ground. Kaku watched his teacher's face carefully as he received this devastating news. For a moment, Josen's eyes filled with tears, and his body seemed to sag with grief. But then, something remarkable happened. Instead of collapsing or raging against the tragedy, Josen simply sat down on a nearby stone and began to breathe slowly and deeply. "Master," the messenger said urgently, "shouldn't you leave immediately? There may be arrangements to make, ceremonies to plan." Josen nodded gently. "Yes, I will go." But first, I need a few moments to be present with this news and what it means." Kaku was amazed. His teacher was facing the worst possible tragedy, and yet he was not running around frantically or drowning in despair. Instead, he was sitting quietly, apparently paying careful attention to his own grief and shock. After several minutes of silent breathing, Yozen stood up calmly. "Kaku," he said, "please come with me. We will travel to my village together." During the long journey, Kaku expected his teacher to be lost in sorrow or distracted by planning. Instead, he found that Josen was more present and attentive than ever. When they stopped to rest, Josen noticed the changing colors of the autumn leaves. When they encountered other travelers, he listened to their stories with complete attention. When they shared simple meals, he ate with obvious appreciation for the food. "Master," Kaku finally asked, unable to contain his confusion, "how can you notice such small things when something so terrible has happened? Shouldn't you be too upset to pay attention to anything else?" Josen stopped walking and looked at his student with eyes that held both deep sadness and profound peace. "Kaku, this is exactly when mindful attention matters most. When we're overwhelmed by tragedy, our first instinct is to escape from the present moment. We get lost in thoughts about what we should have done differently, or we imagine all the ways the future will be ruined by this loss." He gestured to the forest path they were walking. But escaping into mental stories about the past or future doesn't help anyone. My mother and brother are gone, and no amount of mental anguish will bring them back. What I can do is honor their memory by staying fully present for whatever needs my attention right now. Josen picked up a fallen leaf and studied its intricate pattern of veins. If I spend this journey lost in thoughts of regret or worry, I miss the opportunity to appreciate the beauty they would have wanted me to see. If I'm too distracted by grief to listen carefully to the people we meet, I might miss chances to help someone who needs it. He looked directly at Kaku. Mindfulness is not about avoiding difficult emotions or pretending everything is fine. It's about being present for all of life, including the painful parts. When I sit with my grief mindfully, I can feel it completely without being destroyed by it. When I stay present even in sorrow, I remain available to respond wisely to whatever needs my care. When they reached the village, Kaku saw his teacher's wisdom in action. Because Josen was fully present for each conversation and decision, he was able to comfort other grieving families, arrange meaningful ceremonies, and handle practical matters with clarity and compassion. His mindful attention allowed him to be genuinely helpful during a time when many people would have been too overwhelmed to think clearly. That evening, as they sat by the graves of his mother and brother, Josen wept quietly. But even his tears seemed different from ordinary crying. They flowed naturally without the desperate grasping or bitter resentment that often accompanies grief. He was present for his sorrow without being consumed by it. "Now I understand," Kaku said softly. "You're not peaceful because you don't have problems. You're peaceful because you know how to be present with whatever problems arise." Josen nodded. Mindfulness doesn't make difficulties disappear, but it prevents us from making our difficulties worse by fighting against them or running away from them. When we can stay present even with pain, we discover that we're much stronger and more resilient than we realized. This profound story shows us that mindfulness is not a fair-weather practice that only works when life is going smoothly. It's especially valuable during our most challenging times because it prevents us from adding mental and emotional turmoil to whatever difficulties we're already facing. Josen's response to tragedy demonstrates that being present doesn't mean being emotionless or detached. He felt his grief fully but didn't get lost in it. He experienced his sorrow without letting it take over his entire being. This is the middle way that Buddhism teaches us, neither suppressing our emotions nor being overwhelmed by them. When we face loss, disappointment, or crisis, our minds often make things worse by spinning stories about how terrible everything is, how unfair life is, or how we'll never recover from this setback. These mental additions to our actual experience create much more suffering than the original problem ever could. Mindful presence offers a different way to meet difficulty. Instead of fighting against painful emotions or drowning in them, we can learn to be present with them. When we breathe with our sadness instead of resisting it, when we acknowledge our fear without being controlled by it, we discover that we can handle much more than we thought possible. This teaching brings enormous relief because it means we don't have to wait for life to become problem-free before we can find peace. We can learn to be at peace even in the midst of challenges by staying present for what's actually happening, rather than getting lost in our stories about what's happening. The Buddhist path recognizes that suffering is a natural part of life, but it teaches us that much of our suffering comes from our resistance to present moment reality. When we learn to meet each moment with mindful attention, even difficult moments become workable. We stop wasting energy fighting what's already here and can put that energy toward responding wisely and compassionately. As you rest now in this understanding, feel how the practice of presence creates a sense of groundedness and stability. Even if your life contains challenges or uncertainties, this moment right now is manageable. You can breathe with whatever you're experiencing. You can be present for your own life as it unfolds, not as you wish it were, but as it actually island. This is the gift that mindfulness offers. Not the elimination of all problems, but the discovery that we can meet any problem with awareness and grace. Not the promise that life will always be comfortable, but the wisdom to find peace within whatever life brings. When we learn to rest completely in the present moment, we find the deep peace that these ancient teachings have been pointing toward all along. Deep in the mountains, there lived a scholar named Hayato who had devoted his entire life to studying Buddhist philosophy. His small house was packed from floor to ceiling with ancient texts, commentaries, and volumes of teachings from every school of Buddhist thought. He could recite complex philosophical arguments from memory and explain the most subtle points of doctrine with impressive precision. Hayato spent his days reading, taking notes, and writing his own commentaries on the great works of Buddhist literature. He had developed a reputation as one of the most learned Buddhist scholars in the region. Students would occasionally make the difficult journey to his mountain retreat to study with him, hoping to benefit from his vast knowledge. But despite all his learning, Hayato felt something was missing. His understanding was complete in theory, but he often felt as confused about life as anyone else. When faced with daily problems or difficult emotions, his scholarly knowledge seemed to offer little practical help. He could explain the nature of suffering in elaborate detail, but he still suffered. He could describe the path to enlightenment perfectly, but he felt far from enlightened. One winter morning, an old woman appeared at Hayato's door. She was bent with age, dressed in simple peasant clothes, and carrying a small bundle of vegetables. She looked like any other village farmer, certainly not someone who would have anything to teach a great scholar. "Excuse me, sir," she said in a humble voice. "I've been walking all night through the snow, and I'm very cold and tired. Might I sit by your fire for a while to warm myself?" Hayato was annoyed by the interruption to his studies, but his Buddhist training had taught him the importance of compassion. He reluctantly allowed the woman to enter and sit by his small hearth. As she warmed herself, the old woman noticed the books covering every surface of the room. "My," she said with apparent amazement, "you must be very wise to have read so many books about Buddhism." Hayato's chest swelled with pride. "Yes," he said, "I have studied Buddhist philosophy for over 30 years. I know the teachings of all the great masters. There is probably no question about Buddhist doctrine that I cannot answer." The old woman looked impressed. "How wonderful," she said. "I am just a simple farmer, but I have always wondered about something. Perhaps you could help me understand?" "Of course," Hayato said, pleased to have an opportunity to demonstrate his knowledge to someone who would surely be amazed by his wisdom. The woman was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Then she asked, "What is Buddha?" Hayato launched into an elaborate explanation. He spoke about the historical Buddha, about Buddha nature, about the different bodies of Buddha in various philosophical systems. He quoted ancient texts and cited famous masters. He spoke for nearly an hour, covering every aspect of Buddhahood that his scholarly training had taught him. When he finished, he looked at the old woman expectantly, waiting for her to express amazement at his learning. But she simply looked confused. "I'm sorry," she said apologetically, "but I still don't understand. You've told me many things about Buddha, but you haven't told me what Buddha Island." Hayato felt a flash of irritation. "I just explained it in great detail. Perhaps you weren't listening carefully enough. Buddha is the awakened one, the one who achieved complete enlightenment, the teacher who showed us the path to liberation from suffering." Yes, the old woman interrupted gently, "but what is Buddha? Not what Buddha did or what Buddha teaches, but what Buddha is." Hayato tried again, this time using different terminology and approaching the question from various philosophical angles. But no matter how he explained it, the woman kept asking the same simple question, "But what is Buddha?" After 2 hours of increasingly frustrated explanations, Hayato finally snapped. "Look, old woman, if you can't understand such basic Buddhist concepts, perhaps you should stick to farming and leave philosophy to those who are capable of grasping it." The elderly woman looked at him with eyes that suddenly seemed much wiser and deeper than before. "My dear scholar," she said softly, "you have spent 30 years learning about Buddha, but you have never met Buddha. You can describe Buddha perfectly, but you don't know what Buddha Island." She stood up slowly and gathered her small bundle. True understanding is not found in books or explanations. It's found in direct experience. You know what Buddha did and what Buddha taught, but you don't know what Buddha is because you have never looked inside yourself to find the Buddha nature that lives there. As she walked toward the door, she turned back with a gentle smile. "I am just a simple farmer, as you said. I cannot read your books or explain your philosophies. But when I work in my garden, I know Buddha. When I sit quietly in the evening, I meet Buddha. When I help a neighbor or feed a hungry animal, Buddha is there. I may not know about Buddha, but I know Buddha." With that, the old woman disappeared into the snowy morning, leaving Hayato alone with his thousands of books and his suddenly empty-feeling knowledge. For days afterward, Hayato could not concentrate on his studies. The woman's simple question kept echoing in his mind. What is Buddha? He realized that despite all his learning, he truly could not answer this most basic question from direct experience. He knew what others had said about Buddha, but he had never encountered Buddha directly. This encounter changed everything for Hayato. He didn't abandon his books entirely, but he began to balance his scholarly study with simple meditation practice. He started paying attention to his daily activities the way the old woman had described, looking for Buddha in ordinary moments rather than just in philosophical texts. Gradually, Hayato's understanding transformed from something he carried in his head to something he experienced in his heart. His knowledge became wisdom not because he learned new information, but because he began to live what he had always known intellectually. This story illuminates one of Buddhism's most important distinctions, the difference between intellectual knowledge and experiential wisdom. We can study spiritual teachings for years and become experts at explaining them, but this kind of knowledge often remains separate from our actual lived experience. Hayato's encounter with the old woman reveals that true understanding cannot be found in books alone, no matter how many we read or how well we understand them. Wisdom emerges when we stop collecting information about truth and start experiencing truth directly through our own awareness and daily life. The woman in this story represents the kind of simple, direct wisdom that Buddhist teachings ultimately point toward. She might not have been able to give scholarly lectures about Buddha nature, but she knew Buddha nature intimately through her own experience. Her understanding was living and present, not abstract and theoretical. This teaching is especially important in our modern world, where we have access to more spiritual information than any previous generation. We can read thousands of books, watch countless videos, and attend endless workshops about enlightenment and inner peace. But none of this accumulation of knowledge will bring us the deep peace that these teachings promise unless we learn to experience what we're studying. The Buddhist path is not about becoming smarter about spirituality. It's about becoming more awake to the reality that's already present in each moment. When we try to understand our way to peace through thinking and analyzing, we often move further away from the direct experience that would actually bring us peace. Take a gentle breath now and notice the difference between thinking about breathing and actually experiencing the breath. This simple distinction points toward the wisdom the old woman was trying to share. Truth is not something we figure out with our minds, but something we encounter with our whole being. Let us explore this teaching further through another story that shows how wisdom often comes not from having all the answers, but from asking the right questions. There was once a monastery where the monks were known for their intense debates about Buddhist philosophy. Every evening after their work was finished, they would gather in the main hall and engage in elaborate discussions about the nature of reality, the meaning of the teachings, and the proper interpretation of ancient texts. A young monk named Goro particularly loved these debates. He was quick-witted and well-read, and he took great pride in his ability to win arguments and prove other monks wrong. He would spend his days preparing clever points and studying obscure texts so that he could impress everyone with his knowledge during the evening discussions. One day, a new monk arrived at the monastery. His name was Tekkan, and he seemed different from the others. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with weathered hands and a quiet manner that suggested years of hard work rather than scholarly study. During the evening debates, he would sit silently in the back, listening carefully, but never participating. This puzzled Goro. How could anyone sit through such fascinating discussions without wanting to contribute? After a week of watching Tekkan's silence, Goro decided to draw him into the conversation. During a particularly heated debate about the nature of emptiness, Goro turned to the newcomer and said, "Brother Tekken, you've been listening to our discussions all week without saying a word. Surely you must have some opinion about whether phenomena are empty of inherent existence." All eyes turned to Tekken, who looked slightly uncomfortable at being put on the spot. He was quiet for a long moment before responding, "I'm sorry, but I don't really understand what you mean by inherent existence. Could you explain it to me?" Goro was delighted. Here was a chance to display his knowledge to someone who was clearly less educated than himself. He launched into a detailed explanation of emptiness philosophy, using technical terms and citing ancient masters. When he finished, Tekken nodded slowly. "Thank you for that explanation. But I'm still not sure I understand. Can you give me an example of something that has inherent existence and something that doesn't?" Goro was happy to oblige. He spent another 20 minutes providing examples and elaborating on his philosophical understanding. But when he finished, Tekken asked another simple question that showed he still didn't quite grasp the concept. This pattern continued for several evenings. Tekken would ask innocent questions that seemed to reveal his lack of sophisticated understanding, and Goro would respond with increasingly elaborate explanations. The other monks began to see Tekken as somewhat simple, unable to grasp the complex ideas that they debated so skillfully. But something strange began to happen. As Goro tried to explain these concepts to someone who seemed to know nothing about philosophy, he found himself having to examine his own understanding more carefully. Tekken's simple questions forced him to think about what he actually meant by the words he used so confidently. One evening, Tekken asked a question that stopped Goro in his tracks. "Brother Goro, you've explained emptiness to me many times now, and I'm grateful for your patience. But I wonder, when you're not explaining emptiness, when you're just living your daily life, how does this understanding change the way you experience washing dishes or sweeping floors?" Goro opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. He realized that despite all his sophisticated explanations, his understanding of emptiness had never actually changed how he experienced ordinary activities. It remained an intellectual concept separate from his lived experience. "I'm not sure," he admitted, feeling embarrassed for the first time in years. Tekken smiled gently. "Thank you for your honesty. You see, I spent 40 years as a farmer before coming here. I never learned the proper names for Buddhist concepts, and I can't engage in philosophical debates. But when I plant seeds in empty soil, I experience something that might be what you call emptiness. When I watch crops grow through interdependence with sun and rain and soil, I see what you might call dependent origination." He paused, looking around at the gathered monks. "I came here hoping to learn the names for what I had already experienced in my daily work. But I'm starting to think that maybe the names are not the most important thing. Maybe the experience is what matters." The room fell silent. For the first time, many of the monks questioned whether their sophisticated debates were bringing them closer to wisdom or further from it. "Don't misunderstand me," Tekken continued. "I'm not saying study is worthless. I'm grateful for all the explanations you've given me. But I wonder if sometimes we get so interested in talking about truth that we forget to live it." From that night forward, the character of the monastery's evening gatherings began to change. Instead of trying to win debates about concepts, the monks started sharing how their understanding affected their daily experience. Instead of competing to show off their knowledge, they began asking genuine questions about how to live with greater wisdom and compassion. Goro discovered that Tekkan's simple questions had been far more valuable than all his clever arguments. By forcing him to examine what his knowledge actually meant in practical terms, the older monk had helped him begin to transform intellectual understanding into lived wisdom. This story reveals another crucial aspect of Buddhist wisdom. True understanding is not measured by how much we know or how well we can explain concepts, but by how deeply our knowledge has transformed the way we actually live. Tekkan's approach to learning was the opposite of what we might expect. Instead of trying to accumulate more information, he was trying to connect the information to his direct experience. Instead of seeking to impress others with his knowledge, he was genuinely curious about how understanding could improve his daily life. The questions Tekkan asked were more valuable than all of Goro's explanations because they pointed toward the gap between knowing about something and knowing something directly. We can memorize every teaching about compassion, but until we actually become more compassionate in our daily interactions, our knowledge remains incomplete. This teaching offers profound relief because it means we don't need to become scholars or experts to benefit from Buddhist wisdom. We don't need to understand every philosophical nuance or memorize complex texts. We simply need to take whatever understanding we have, however basic, and begin applying it to our actual experience. The deep peace that these teachings offer comes not from intellectual mastery, but from the gradual transformation of how we meet life moment by moment. When we stop trying to collect spiritual knowledge and start living spiritual principles, we discover that even simple understanding can bring profound changes to our experience. As you rest now in this teaching, notice how it feels to let go of any pressure to understand everything perfectly. The Buddhist path is not about becoming an expert in Buddhist philosophy. It's about becoming more awake, more compassionate, and more peaceful in whatever circumstances we find ourselves. The wisdom that brings true transformation is often surprisingly simple. Like the old woman who knew Buddha through her daily work, like Tekkan who understood emptiness through farming, we can find the deepest teachings reflected in our most ordinary activities when we bring genuine attention and care to them. This understanding naturally leads to the kind of peace that allows both the body and mind to rest completely. When we stop struggling to figure everything out with our thinking minds and start experiencing life directly with our whole being, we find the sanctuary of presence that these ancient teachings have always been pointing toward. A fisherman named Ichiro lived in a small coastal village where his family had fished the same waters for generations. He owned a beautiful boat that his grandfather had built by hand, with carved wooden details and a sail that caught the wind perfectly. This boat was not just his livelihood, but his pride and joy. He would spend hours each week polishing its wood and mending its nets, keeping everything in perfect condition. Ichiro was known throughout the village as the most successful fisherman. His nets always seemed to find the richest schools of fish, and his knowledge of the ocean's moods and patterns was unmatched. Other fishermen would watch him launch his boat each morning and hope to learn his secrets. But Ichiro had become so attached to his boat and his success that fishing was no longer enjoyable. Every morning he would wake up worried about the weather, anxious about whether the fish would be running, fearful that something might damage his precious boat. He would spend the night before each fishing trip checking and rechecking his equipment, unable to sleep for planning and worrying. On the water, Ichiro's attachment to catching fish made him tense and calculating. He would become frustrated when other fishermen had good luck in areas where he found nothing. He would cut his trips short if the fishing seemed slow, or push himself to exhaustion when the fish were biting well, afraid to miss any opportunity. One morning, Ichiro discovered that his boat had been stolen during the night. Someone had cut the rope and taken it out to sea while the village slept. Ichiro stood on the dock staring at the empty space where his boat should have been, feeling as if his whole identity had vanished with it. The other fishermen in the village felt sorry for Ichiro and offered to help, but most of their boats were barely large enough for one person, let alone two. Only old Saburo, whose tiny, rickety fishing boat was held together with patches and rope, offered to take Ichiro out with him. Ichiro had always looked down on Saburo's poor equipment and modest catches. The old man's boat looked like it might sink at any moment, and his nets were so old and mended that they seemed to be made more of patches than original material. But, with no other options, Ichiro reluctantly accepted the offer. As they paddled out in Saburo's leaky little boat, Ichiro felt embarrassed and anxious. How could he catch fish with such inadequate equipment? What if other fishermen saw him in this pathetic vessel? His reputation as a successful fisherman would be ruined. But something unexpected happened once they reached the fishing grounds. Without his perfect boat and carefully maintained equipment to worry about, Ichiro found himself paying attention to things he had never noticed before. He watched the way Saburo read the water, not through sophisticated knowledge, but through simple, quiet observation. The old man would sit perfectly still for long minutes, just listening to the rhythm of the waves and feeling the movement of the current. When he cast his patched nets, he did so without any sense of urgency or attachment to the outcome. If the nets came up empty, he would simply try another spot. If they came up full, he would smile quietly and continue his work. "Saburo," Ichiro asked, "aren't you worried that your nets might tear? They look like they could fall apart at any moment." The old man chuckled. "They might. They've torn many times before, and I've mended them. If they tear today, I'll mend them tonight. If they fall apart completely, I'll make new ones. The fish don't care how pretty the nets are." As the day progressed, Ichiro found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. Without his own equipment to maintain and protect, he could simply focus on the experience of fishing itself. He began to remember why he had loved being on the water as a child, before fishing became about success and reputation. To his amazement, they caught more fish that day than he had caught in weeks with his sophisticated boat and equipment. But more importantly, he enjoyed the experience in a way he had almost forgotten was possible. "How is this happening?" he asked Saburo. "Your equipment is so old and simple, but we're having such success." Saburo smiled as he hauled in another net full of fish. "Maybe it's because I'm not afraid of losing anything. My boat is already falling apart, so I don't worry about scratching it. My nets are already patched, so I don't fear tearing them. When you're not protecting anything, you can focus completely on what you're doing." That evening, as they returned to shore, Ichiro realized that the loss of his boat had freed him from something he hadn't even known was imprisoning him. His attachment to his perfect equipment had been preventing him from fishing with the natural ease and attention that actually brought success. Over the following weeks, while he waited to see if his stolen boat would be recovered, Ichiro continued fishing with Saburo. Each day brought new discoveries about how his attachment to having the best equipment had actually been making him a worse fisherman. His constant worry about protecting his possessions had prevented him from being fully present for the work itself. When his boat was eventually found and returned to him, Ichiro faced an interesting choice. He could return to his old way of fishing with all its anxiety and attachment. Or he could continue with the freedom he had discovered in Saburo's simple approach. He chose to keep his boat, but to fish with a different attitude. He still maintained his equipment carefully, but he no longer lived in fear of losing it. He still worked to catch fish, but he didn't let his success or failure determine his peace of mind. He had learned the difference between caring for something and being enslaved by it. Years later, when young fishermen would ask Ichiro for advice, he would tell them, "Take good care of your equipment, but don't let your equipment take care of you. Love your work, but don't let your work become your master." The best fishing happens when you're not afraid of coming home empty-handed. This story reveals one of Buddhism's most liberating insights about the nature of attachment. We often think that loving something means holding onto it tightly, but true love allows for freedom. Ichiro discovered that his attachment to his boat and his success was actually preventing him from enjoying the very activities he thought he was protecting. The Buddhist understanding of non-attachment is often misunderstood as indifference or not caring about anything. But Saburo's example shows us what it really means. He cared deeply about fishing, but he wasn't enslaved by his equipment or obsessed with outcomes. This freedom allowed him to respond naturally and skillfully to whatever each day brought. Non-attachment doesn't mean we stop having preferences or working toward goals. Ichiro still preferred catching fish to not catching fish, and he still took care of his boat when it was returned. But he learned to hold these preferences lightly, without letting them control his peace of mind or prevent him from being present for the experience itself. This teaching transforms how we relate to everything we value. Our relationships become more loving when we stop trying to possess and control the people we care about. Our work becomes more fulfilling when we stop being enslaved by our need for recognition and success. Our possessions bring more joy when we appreciate them without living in fear of losing them. The deep peace that Buddhist teachings offer comes partly from this liberation, from the anxiety of constant protection and control. When we learn to engage fully with life without being attached to specific outcomes, we discover a freedom that no external circumstance can take away. Breathe gently and feel how this understanding creates space in your heart. Notice how even thinking about holding your preferences more lightly brings a sense of relief, like setting down a heavy burden you didn't realize you were carrying. Let us explore this wisdom further through another story that shows how non-attachment can transform even our relationship with our own identity and achievements. Master Ryonen was widely regarded as one of the most beautiful and accomplished women of her generation. Born into a noble family, she had received the finest education and had mastered poetry, calligraphy, music, and dance. Her beauty was legendary throughout the region, and many wealthy men sought her hand in marriage. But Ryonen felt called to a spiritual life. Despite her family's objections and society's expectations, she decided to become a Buddhist nun. She approached several monasteries, but none would accept her. The abbots would take one look at her exceptional beauty and refuse her entry. "Your appearance would be too distracting for the monks," they would tell her. "You should marry and live a conventional life. The monastic path is not suitable for someone like you." Ryonen was determined to pursue her spiritual calling, but her physical beauty had become an obstacle she couldn't overcome. She began to understand that her attachment to her appearance and society's attachment to it was preventing her from living the life she truly wanted. After being rejected by the 7th monastery, Ryonen made a radical decision. She returned home and went to the kitchen, where she heated a large iron pot until it was red hot. Then, without hesitation, she pressed the burning metal against her face, scarring herself permanently. The physical pain was intense, but the emotional liberation was immediate. She had freed herself from the burden of exceptional beauty that had defined her entire life. She was no longer the beautiful Ryonan, but simply Ryonan, a woman seeking spiritual understanding. When she appeared at the 8th monastery with her scarred face, the abbot accepted her immediately. Her willingness to sacrifice her most prized possession, her beauty, demonstrated the depth of her commitment to spiritual practice. In the years that followed, Ryonan became known not for her appearance, but for her wisdom and compassion. She wrote poetry that captured profound spiritual insights, and her teachings helped countless students understand the path to liberation. One of her most famous poems, written years after her self-scarring, reads, "To serve Buddha, I burned my face with fire. The flames that scarred my features long ago are nothing to the burning of my soul. Both fires lead to the same place of peace." Students would sometimes ask Ryonan if she regretted destroying her beauty. She would smile and say, "I destroyed nothing. I only freed myself from the prison of others' expectations and my own attachment. The beauty that mattered was always on the inside." But the most profound part of Ryonan's story came near the end of her life. A young nun approached her and said, "Master, I admire your sacrifice, but I cannot imagine being brave enough to destroy my appearance as you did. How did you find such courage?" Ryonan looked at her student with eyes full of gentle wisdom. "I did not destroy my appearance out of courage," she said. "I destroyed it out of attachment. I was so attached to becoming a nun that I was willing to sacrifice anything to achieve that goal." The young nun looked confused. "But isn't dedication to spiritual practice a good thing?" "Dedication, yes," Ryonan replied. "But not attachment. When I burned my face, I thought I was showing my commitment to Buddha. But I was actually showing my attachment to a particular identity, that of being a nun. I traded one form of attachment for another." She paused, looking out at the monastery garden where flowers bloomed and faded according to their natural cycles. True freedom comes not from changing our external circumstances, but from releasing our grip on all identities, even spiritual ones. The Buddha I sought by becoming a nun was the same Buddha that was present when I was a beautiful woman in my father's house. I simply couldn't see it then because I was too attached to my appearance. "So was your sacrifice meaningless?" the student asked. Ryonan smiled. "No, it was necessary for me at that time. Sometimes we must go to extremes to learn what moderation means. My scarred face taught me something that no amount of studying could have revealed. It showed me that freedom comes not from changing what we look like or what role we play, but from changing how tightly we hold on to these things." This profound story reveals multiple layers of Buddhist teaching about attachment and identity. Ryonan's initial attachment to her beauty prevented her from pursuing the spiritual life she desired. But her later attachment to becoming a nun led her to an extreme action that, while effective in achieving her goal, was itself another form of clinging. The deepest wisdom in her story comes from her mature understanding that true freedom doesn't require us to destroy or change our circumstances. It requires us to change our relationship to those circumstances. We can be beautiful or scarred, wealthy or poor, accomplished or ordinary, and still find the same liberation through releasing our attachment to these conditions. This teaching is especially relevant in our culture, which constantly encourages us to define ourselves by our appearance, achievements, possessions, or roles. We think we are our job title, our relationship status, our physical attributes, or our social position. But Buddhist wisdom teaches us that these identities, while practically useful, are not our true nature. The peace that comes from this understanding is immense because it means our well-being doesn't depend on maintaining any particular external conditions. We don't have to stay young, successful, healthy, or admired to be fundamentally okay. Our deepest security comes from recognizing what remains unchanged, regardless of our changing circumstances. Ryanan's final insight points toward the ultimate teaching of non-attachment. Even our spiritual practices and achievements can become new forms of bondage if we cling to them too tightly. The goal is not to become a perfect meditator or an enlightened being, but to recognize the freedom that is always present regardless of our spiritual accomplishments. This doesn't mean we abandon effort or stop caring about our growth and development. It means we hold our spiritual journey lightly, engaging wholeheartedly while remaining unattached to specific outcomes. Like Ichiro learning to fish without fear of failure, we can practice without being enslaved by our need for spiritual success. As you rest in this teaching now, feel into the possibility of releasing your grip on whatever identities you've been holding most tightly. Whether it's being successful, being liked, being right, or even being spiritual, notice what it might feel like to hold these aspects of yourself more lightly. This is the freedom that Buddhist teachings ultimately point toward. Not the freedom from having preferences or responsibilities, but the freedom from being controlled by our preferences and responsibilities. Not the freedom from caring about life, but the freedom to care without suffering when things don't go according to our plans. In this space of non-attachment, we find the deep peace that allows us to engage fully with life while remaining unshakably calm at our center. This is the sanctuary that these ancient teachings offer, a place of rest that no external change can disturb because it doesn't depend on anything external at all. In the mountains above a small village lived a woodcutter named Daichi, who had spent his entire life cutting and selling firewood. Every morning he would climb the steep forest paths, select the right trees, and spend the day cutting and splitting wood. Every evening he would return home tired and satisfied with his simple work. Daichi had always thought of himself as just a woodcutter, nothing more. He was not educated like the village scholars, not wealthy like the merchants, not artistic like the craftsmen. When people asked him what he did, he would say simply, "I cut wood. That's all I know how to do." One day, while working deep in the forest, Daichi heard strange sounds coming from a nearby grove. Following the sounds, he discovered a group of monks who had become lost while traveling between monasteries. They were sitting by a small stream, looking worried and confused. Their leader, an elderly abbot, approached Daichi respectfully. "Excuse me, friend. We have been walking for 2 days and cannot find our way back to the main path. Do you know these mountains well?" Daichi nodded. "I've been walking these paths for 40 years. I know every tree and stream in these mountains." The abbot's face lit up with relief. "Could you possibly guide us back to the road that leads to Zenzen Temple? We would be very grateful for your help." Daichi agreed immediately, though it meant leaving his work for the day. He led the group of 15 monks through paths that seemed completely unmarked to them, but were as familiar to him as the rooms of his own house. As they walked, the monks were amazed by Daichi's knowledge of the forest. "How do you know that this path leads to the main road?" One monk asked as Daichi guided them through what seemed like dense, pathless woods. "I can tell by the way the moss grows on the trees," Daichi explained. "The moss is thicker on the north side, and I know the road runs east-west through this valley. Also, I can hear the sound of the river that runs beside the road." The monks listened carefully and realized they could hear nothing but forest sounds. But as they continued following Daichi, they indeed came to a river, and soon after, to the main road. As they walked, Daichi continued to share his knowledge naturally. He pointed out which plants could be eaten safely, which ones could heal minor injuries, where the best water could be found, and how to read weather signs in the sky and wind. "You know so much about living in harmony with nature," one young monk said with obvious admiration. "Have you studied these things in books?" Daichi laughed. "I can't read books. I just pay attention to what the forest teaches me every day. When you spend enough time with trees and streams, they tell you what you need to know." When they reached the road that would lead the monks safely to their destination, the abbot took Daichi's hands in gratitude. "My friend, you have saved us from a very difficult situation. How can we repay your kindness?" "No payment is needed," Daichi said. "I was glad to help." But the abbot was not finished. "You say you are just a woodcutter, but today you have been our teacher. You have shown us wisdom about reading nature that none of our books contain. You have demonstrated compassion by helping strangers without expecting anything in return. You have shared your knowledge freely and guided us with patience." The old monk looked directly into Daichi's eyes. "Tell me, what makes someone a teacher? Is it having read many books, or is it having learned from life and sharing that learning with others who need it?" Daichi was quiet for a long moment, considering this question. I suppose it's about sharing what you know to help others." "And what makes someone wise?" The abbot continued. "Is it knowing complicated theories, or is it understanding how to live well and peacefully?" Again, Daichi thought carefully. "Maybe wisdom is knowing how to work with life instead of fighting against it." The abbot smiled. "Then you are both a teacher and a wise man, whether you call yourself these things or not. You have taught us more in one afternoon than we learned in many days of formal study." As the monks continued on their journey, Daichi walked slowly back into the forest, thinking about what the abbot had said. For 40 years, he had seen himself as just a woodcutter, but the monks had seen him as a teacher and guide. Which view was correct? That night, as he sat by his fire eating his simple dinner, Daichi reflected on his conversation with the monks. He realized that he had been limiting himself with his own narrow definition of who he was. He had thought that being a woodcutter was somehow less valuable than being a scholar or monk, but the abbot had helped him see that his deep knowledge and natural compassion were forms of wisdom. Over the following weeks, Daichi began to notice things about himself that he had never recognized before. When neighbors came to him for advice about practical problems, he realized he was indeed teaching. When he helped lost travelers find their way, he was demonstrating compassion. When he worked in harmony with the natural rhythms of the forest, he was practicing a form of meditation. Nothing about his daily activities had changed, but his understanding of who he was had expanded completely. He was still a woodcutter, but he was also much more. He was a teacher, a guide, a wise man, and a source of help for his community. Years later, when people would ask Daichi about the nature of identity, he would say, "I used to think I was just a woodcutter. Then I learned I was also a teacher and a wise man. But eventually I understood that all these labels are like clothes I wear. Underneath them, I am simply someone who tries to be helpful and pay attention to life. That seems to be enough." This story reveals one of Buddhism's most profound teachings about the nature of self and identity. We often limit ourselves by accepting narrow definitions of who we are, but these identities are not fixed truths. They are simply stories we tell ourselves, and we have the power to recognize the fuller truth of our being. Daichi's transformation didn't require him to change his job or learn new skills. It required him to see beyond the limiting label he had placed on himself. When he stopped defining himself as just a woodcutter, he could recognize all the wisdom, compassion, and knowledge that he had developed through his simple, devoted work. This teaching is especially important because many people suffer from thinking they are just something ordinary or unimportant. Just a parent, just a worker, just a student. But Buddhist wisdom teaches us that there is no such thing as just anything. Every role, when approached with attention and care, becomes a path for developing wisdom and compassion. The truth that Daichi discovered is that our deepest identity is not found in any particular role or achievement. It's found in our capacity to pay attention, to learn from experience, and to help others. These qualities can develop within any life circumstances, whether we're woodcutters or scholars, parents or professionals. This understanding brings tremendous freedom because it means we don't need to change our external circumstances to discover our true value. We don't need special education, impressive jobs, or recognized status to be worthy of respect and self-acceptance. The wisdom and compassion that matter most can develop through any sincere engagement with life. Take a gentle breath and feel how this teaching creates space around any limiting ideas you might have about yourself. Notice what it might feel like to see beyond the labels you've accepted and recognize the fuller truth of who you are. Let us explore this wisdom further through another story that shows how our true nature is often hidden not by circumstances, but by our own mistaken ideas about what makes someone valuable. There was once a monastery that took in orphan children and raised them as part of the community. One of these children, a boy named Kodo, had been found as an infant with no knowledge of his parentage or background. The monks raised him with love and care, but Kodo always felt different from the others. Unlike the monks who had chosen their spiritual path, Kodo felt like he belonged nowhere in particular. He wasn't officially a monk, since he had never taken vows, but he wasn't a regular villager either, since he had been raised in the monastery. He helped with daily tasks and participated in temple life, but he often felt like he was just existing without any real purpose or identity. As Kodo grew into a young man, his sense of not belonging became stronger. He would watch the monks during their formal ceremonies and feel like an outsider. He would see village families during festivals and feel envious of their clear family bonds. He began to think of himself as nobody special, just someone who had happened to end up at the monastery by accident. One day, a famous master from the capital came to visit their temple. Master Sojin was known throughout the region for his wisdom and his ability to see the true nature of anyone he met. The local monks were excited to receive such an honored guest, and they prepared their finest ceremonies and presentations to impress him. During Master Sojin's stay, each monk was invited to meet with him privately to receive personal guidance. Kodo assumed he wouldn't be included in these meetings since he wasn't officially a monk, but to his surprise, he was called to see the master just like everyone else. Kodo approached the meeting nervously, unsure what to say to such an important teacher. He entered the simple room where Master Sojin was sitting and bowed respectfully. "Please sit," the master said kindly. "Tell me about yourself." "There isn't much to tell, Master," Kodo said humbly. "I'm not really anybody special. I was left here as a baby, and the monks have been kind enough to let me stay. I help with daily work, but I don't have any particular skills or purpose. I'm just here." Master Sogen listened carefully to this self-description, studying Kodo's face with gentle attention. When Kodo finished, the master asked, "Who told you that you are nobody special?" Kodo was surprised by the question. "Well, nobody told me directly. I just know it's true. I don't have parents or a family name. I haven't taken vows or achieved anything important. I'm just an orphan who lives at a monastery." "I see," Master Sogen said quietly. "And who told you that having parents makes someone special? Who decided that taking vows or achieving things determines a person's value?" Kodo had never thought about these questions before. "I suppose I just assumed these things mattered." Master Sogen smiled gently. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at you. I see someone who has been shaped by daily spiritual practice since infancy. I see someone who has learned to live simply and help others without expecting recognition. I see someone who has grown up surrounded by wisdom and compassion and has absorbed these qualities naturally." The master leaned forward slightly. "Most people come to spiritual practice later in life after their minds have been filled with worldly desires and confused ideas. You have been practicing from the beginning, even if you didn't know that's what you were doing. Your ordinary daily life has been a form of meditation." Kodo felt confused. "But I've never achieved enlightenment or had profound realizations like the stories about great masters." "And how do you know that?" Master Sogen asked. "What do you think enlightenment looks like? Do you think it must come with dramatic visions or supernatural powers? I thought it would feel different somehow. I thought enlightened people would feel special or different from ordinary people." Master Sogen laughed softly. "My friend, you have been looking for enlightenment as if it were something extraordinary that would make you feel important and special. But what if enlightenment is simply the complete acceptance of being ordinary? What if wisdom is found not in feeling special, but in recognizing that everyone is already complete exactly as they are?" He gestured toward the window where they could see other monks going about their daily tasks. "Look at your brothers out there. They are sweeping, cooking, gardening. Are they any less wise when they're doing these simple tasks than when they're sitting in meditation? Is their Buddha nature only present during formal practice?" Kodo watched the familiar scene of daily monastery life with new eyes. He began to understand what the master was pointing toward. "The Buddha nature you've been seeking," Master Sogen continued, "is not hidden somewhere inside you waiting to be discovered through special achievements. It's what's been looking through your eyes your whole life. It's what's been present during every moment of kindness, every act of service, every instant of simple attention to your daily tasks." Master Sogen stood up and placed a gentle hand on Kodo's shoulder. "You came here telling me you are nobody special, and, in a way, you're absolutely right. You are not special in the way the ego wants to be special, not important in the way the mind wants to be important. But this ordinariness you're disappointed by is actually your greatest gift. You have lived your whole life without the burden of trying to become someone special, and because of that, you have remained naturally who you really are." That evening, as Kodo went about his usual tasks of helping with dinner and evening cleanup, everything felt simultaneously exactly the same and completely different. He was still doing the same work, still living the same simple life, but he was no longer waiting for something better to happen. He was no longer looking for a different identity or a special achievement to make him feel valuable. He realized that the seeking itself had been the only thing preventing him from recognizing what was already present. His true nature had been there all along, not hidden, but so obvious that he had overlooked it while searching for something more dramatic. This profound story illuminates the deepest teaching about our true nature in Buddhist wisdom. We often think we need to become someone special, achieve something important, or have dramatic spiritual experiences to be worthy or complete. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Our true nature is already present, not as something extraordinary, but as the ordinary awareness that experiences our daily life. Kodo's journey shows us how our seeking for a special identity can actually prevent us from recognizing the natural completeness that's already here. When we stop trying to become someone important and instead appreciate who we already are, we discover that we were never actually lacking anything. This teaching brings immense relief because it means we don't need to wait for some future achievement or realization to be fundamentally okay. We don't need to earn our worth through accomplishments or spiritual attainments. The awareness that's reading these words right now, the consciousness that experiences your thoughts and feelings, is already complete and perfect, just as it island. The Buddhist path is not about becoming enlightened, but about recognizing the enlightenment that's already present. Not about achieving a special state, but about seeing through the illusion that we need a special state to be complete. Like Kodo, we often overlook our natural wholeness while searching for something more impressive. This understanding naturally leads to a deep sense of ease and acceptance. When we stop trying to be someone other than who we are, when we stop waiting for some future moment when we'll finally be good enough or special enough, we can rest in the simple truth of our present experience. As you settle into this teaching now, feel into the possibility that you are already exactly who you're meant to be. Not perfect in the sense of having no room for growth or learning, but complete in the sense that your fundamental nature lacks nothing. The peace that Buddhist teachings offer is not something you need to achieve, but something you can recognize right here, right now, in the simple fact of your own aware presence. This recognition is the greatest gift these ancient teachings offer. Not techniques for becoming better, but the wisdom to see that underneath all our ideas about ourselves, we are already whole. This wholeness is what allows us to rest completely, knowing that we are home exactly where we are. There once lived a master gardener named Yuki, who was famous throughout the region for creating the most beautiful gardens anyone had ever seen. Her specialty was cherry trees, and people would travel from distant provinces just to walk through her gardens during the brief cherry blossom season. Yuki had spent 40 years perfecting her art. She knew exactly which varieties of cherry trees would bloom at different times, creating waves of color that lasted for weeks. She understood how to shape the trees so their blossoms would frame mountain views perfectly. She had created stone paths that guided visitors to see each tree from its most beautiful angle. But Yuki had a problem that troubled her deeply. Every year, just as her gardens reached their peak beauty, the cherry blossoms would begin to fall. Within days, the magnificent display she had worked all year to create would be gone, leaving only green leaves where stunning flowers had been. The fleeting nature of the blossoms filled her with sadness and frustration. Why must something so beautiful last such a short time? She would ask herself as she swept the fallen petals from her paths. If only I could make the blossoms stay longer, then people could truly appreciate their beauty. Yuki began experimenting with ways to extend the blooming period. She tried different fertilizers, built small shelters to protect the flowers from wind and rain, and even attempted to coat some blossoms with clear substance to preserve them. But nothing worked. The cherry blossoms followed their natural rhythm, blooming gloriously and then falling away, regardless of her efforts to control them. One spring morning, as Yuki was sadly sweeping up another pile of fallen petals, an old monk appeared on the path. He was walking slowly, stopping frequently to look at the trees, even though most of the blossoms had already fallen. "Excuse me," Yuki called to him, "you've come too late. The peak blooming was last week. There's not much left to see now." The monk looked surprised. "Too late? But I can see many beautiful things right now." He gestured toward a tree where the last few blossoms clung to branches that were already showing fresh green leaves. "Look how lovely this is, the old blossoms saying goodbye while new life begins." Yuki looked where he was pointing, but saw only the remnants of what had been much more beautiful days earlier. "But you should have seen it last week, when all the trees were in full bloom. That was when it was truly magnificent." The old monk smiled and sat down on a stone bench beneath the nearly bare tree. "Tell me about that day." Yuki's eyes lit up as she described the peak bloom. Every tree was covered in perfect pink and white flowers. The air was filled with their delicate fragrance. Visitors walked the paths in wonder, some of them with tears in their eyes from the beauty. It was like paradise itself. "It sounds wonderful," the monk said. "And how did you feel during that perfect day?" Yuki paused, remembering. "I felt anxious, actually. Even while people were praising the beauty, I was worried about how long it would last. I kept looking for signs that the petals were beginning to fall. I couldn't fully enjoy the moment because I was already dreading its end." The monk nodded thoughtfully. "And how do you feel now, a week later?" "Sad. Empty. Like the whole year of work was wasted because the beauty was so brief." The old monk was quiet for a long moment, watching a few remaining petals drift slowly to the ground. Then he asked, "What if the shortness of the blooming is not the enemy of beauty, but the source of it?" Yuki looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Tell me," the monk said, "would people travel from distant provinces to see cherry blossoms if they bloomed all year long? Would visitors walk your paths with tears in their eyes if the flowers lasted for months? Would you treasure the sight of full bloom if it was always available?" Yuki had never considered this perspective. "I suppose not. If cherry blossoms bloomed constantly, they would become ordinary." "Exactly," the monk smiled. "The very thing that causes you sadness, the brief nature of the blossoms, is what makes them so precious. Their beauty is inseparable from their impermanence. When people see cherry blossoms, they are not just seeing pretty flowers. They are seeing the poignant truth that all beautiful things pass away, and this knowledge makes the beauty even more meaningful." He gestured toward the nearly bare tree above them. "This tree will give you a new gift now. In a few weeks, it will offer fresh green shade for summer visitors. In autumn, it will display brilliant colored leaves. In winter, it will show you the elegant structure of its bare branches. Each season has its own beauty, but only because each season lets go when its time is finished." As they sat together, Yuki began to see her garden with different eyes. The fallen petals on the path were not just debris to be cleaned up, but evidence of beauty that had been fully expressed and completed. The green leaves beginning to emerge were not inferior replacements for flowers, but the next chapter in the tree's ongoing story. "I have been fighting against the very thing that makes my garden special," she realized. "I wanted to stop time at the moment of peak beauty, but that would destroy what makes the beauty powerful. The monk stood up to continue his walk. The cherry blossoms have been teaching the deepest truth about life for centuries. They show us that because things pass away, each moment is irreplaceable. Because beauty is temporary, it deserves our complete attention and appreciation. When we truly understand impermanence, we don't love things less. We love them more fully. From that day forward, Yuki's relationship with her garden completely transformed. She still worked carefully to create the best conditions for blooming, but she no longer fought against the natural cycle of flowering and fading. During peak bloom, instead of worrying about when it would end, she would sit quietly among the trees and drink in their beauty completely. When the petals began to fall, instead of feeling sad, she would appreciate the graceful way the blossoms completed their brief dance and made space for what came next. Visitors noticed the change in Yuki. She seemed more present and peaceful, more able to share in their wonder rather than being distracted by her own concerns. The garden itself seemed more beautiful somehow, not because the flowers lasted longer, but because the gardener had learned to love them exactly as they were, temporary and perfect. This story reveals one of Buddhism's most profound teachings about the nature of impermanence. We often think that if we could make beautiful moments last forever, we would be happier. But the truth is exactly opposite. The temporary nature of experiences is what gives them their preciousness and power to move us. When we truly understand impermanence, we stop wasting time trying to grasp and hold on to fleeting moments and instead learn to be fully present for them while they're here. Like Yuki discovering that her anxiety about losing the blossoms was preventing her from enjoying them, we often miss the beauty of the present moment because we're worried about its ending. This teaching transforms how we relate to everything we love. Instead of being paralyzed by the knowledge that good times won't last forever, we can be liberated by it. Each moment becomes precious precisely because it won't come again. Each experience with loved ones becomes meaningful because our time together is limited. Each day becomes a gift because we know it's not guaranteed. The Buddhist understanding of impermanence is not meant to make us sad or pessimistic. It's meant to wake us up to the incredible value of what's happening right now. When we stop fighting against the natural flow of change and instead learn to appreciate each stage of life's unfolding, we find a deeper peace and gratitude than any attempt to freeze time could ever provide. Take a gentle breath and feel how this understanding creates both tenderness and appreciation for this moment. Notice how knowing that this peaceful time won't last forever makes it more precious, not less. This is the gift that accepting impermanence offers us. Let us explore this wisdom further through another story that shows how understanding the temporary nature of life can actually make us more alive and present. In a mountain village, there lived an old doctor named Kenji who had spent his entire career caring for the people of his community. He had delivered their babies, treated their illnesses, and comforted their families through times of loss. Now, in his 70s, Dr. Kenji had developed a serious illness of his own, and he knew he had only a few months left to live. Many people expected Dr. Kenji to become depressed or bitter about his diagnosis. After spending his life healing others, it seemed cruel that he should face a disease that couldn't be cured. But instead of becoming despondent, something surprising happened. Dr. Kenji seemed to come alive in a way that his friends and patients had never seen before. Every morning, he would wake up and spend time looking out his window at the mountains, as if seeing them for the first time. He would savor his simple breakfast with obvious pleasure, paying attention to tastes and textures he had barely noticed for decades. When neighbors came to visit, he would listen to their stories with complete attention, as if each conversation was the most important thing in the world. Dr. Kenji also began doing things he had always said he didn't have time for. He started painting watercolors of the mountain views from his house. He wrote long letters to old friends he hadn't contacted in years. He spent hours sitting with children in the village, telling them stories and listening to their dreams and concerns. His assistant, a young nurse named May, was puzzled by this transformation. One afternoon, as Dr. Kenji was carefully painting a picture of a single flower in a small vase, she asked him about the change she had observed. "Doctor, forgive me for asking, but you seem happier now than I've ever seen you, even though you're facing such a difficult situation. How is this possible?" Dr. Kenji set down his brush and smiled at the young woman. "May, do you know what I discovered when I learned I was dying?" "What?" "I discovered that I had been dying all along. We all are. The only difference is that now I know approximately how much time I have left, and this knowledge has become a great teacher." May looked confused, so Dr. Kenji continued. "For 70 years, I lived as if I had unlimited time. I would put off conversations with old friends, thinking I would call them next month. I would rush through meals to get to the next task, assuming I could enjoy food properly someday when I wasn't so busy. I would notice beautiful sunsets but barely pause to appreciate them, believing there would always be another sunset tomorrow." He gestured toward the flower he had been painting. "But when you know your time is limited, everything becomes precious. This flower will fade in a few days, and I might not be here to see many more flowers after that. So I paint it now with complete attention, as if it's the most important flower that ever bloomed." Dr. Kenji stood up and walked to the window. "Look at those mountains, May. I have seen them every day for 40 years, but I was usually too preoccupied to really see them. Now that I know I won't be looking at them much longer, each time I see them feels like a miracle." May began to understand. "You're saying that knowing about death makes life more meaningful?" "Not just knowing about death intellectually, but really accepting that our time is limited," Dr. Kenji clarified. "Most people know they will die someday, but they live as if they have forever. When you truly accept impermanence, not as a sad fact, but as the thing that makes each moment irreplaceable, everything changes." He returned to his painting, adding careful details to the flower's petals. "I'm not happy because I'm dying, May. I'm happy because I'm finally truly living. For the first time in decades, I'm not postponing my life, waiting for some perfect moment to begin appreciating what I have. I'm here now, completely present for whatever time remains." Over the following weeks, May watched Dr. Kenji continue to embrace each day with remarkable presence and gratitude. He never seemed to waste a moment on regret or self-pity. Instead, he poured his full attention into whatever he was doing, whether it was having a conversation, eating a meal, or simply watching clouds move across the sky. When Dr. Kenji's condition worsened and he became bedridden, his approach remained the same. He would listen carefully to the sounds outside his window, appreciating birdsong and wind in the trees as if they were precious music. When visitors came, he would look into their eyes with complete attention, making each person feel like they were the most important person in the world. On his final day, Dr. Kenji called May to his bedside. "I want to thank you for caring for me during these months," he said. "And I want to share one last thing with you." "What is that, Doctor?" Don't wait until you're dying to start really living. The knowledge that time is precious doesn't have to come from a terminal diagnosis. Every day is terminal, in the sense that each day that passes is gone forever. If you can remember this, not as a morbid thought, but as a reminder of how valuable each moment is, you will live more fully than most people ever do. Dr. Kenji died peacefully that evening, and those who had witnessed his final months said they had never seen anyone face death with such grace and aliveness. His example became a teaching for the entire village about how understanding impermanence can transform the way we experience life. This profound story shows us how accepting the reality of death can paradoxically make us more alive. Dr. Kenji's transformation illustrates one of Buddhism's most important insights. When we truly understand that our time is limited, we stop taking moments for granted and begin to experience life with much greater richness and presence. Most of us live with what we might call immortality syndrome. We know intellectually that we won't live forever, but we behave as if we have unlimited time. We postpone important conversations, delay pursuing our dreams, and rush through daily experiences while planning for some future when we'll finally slow down and appreciate what we have. But when we deeply accept impermanence, not just as a concept, but as a lived reality, everything changes. Like Dr. Kenji savoring his breakfast or painting flowers with complete attention, we begin to approach each experience as if it might be our last, because in a very real sense, it might be. This moment, exactly as it is right now, will never come again. The Buddhist teaching of impermanence is ultimately about learning to love life more completely by understanding its temporary nature. Like cherry blossoms being more beautiful because they fade quickly, our experiences become more meaningful when we recognize they won't last forever. This wisdom naturally leads to the kind of presence and gratitude that allows the heart and mind to rest deeply. When we're fully present for this moment, instead of anxiously planning the future or regretting the past, we find the peace that has always been available right here, right now. As you settle into this teaching, feel how accepting impermanence creates a sense of both poignancy and appreciation for your life exactly as it island. You don't need to wait for perfect circumstances or a terminal diagnosis to begin treasuring each breath, each moment of awareness, each opportunity to experience the simple miracle of being alive. This recognition that life is both temporary and precious naturally leads us toward the final integration of all these teachings. When we understand that we have limited time to embody wisdom and compassion, when we see that each moment is irreplaceable, we're ready to rest in the deepest truth that Buddhist teachings offer. The profound peace that comes from being completely present for the gift of existence itself. An old woman named Chiyo lived alone in a simple cottage at the edge of a village. She had spent her whole life there, raising her children, caring for her husband until his death, and helping neighbors through countless seasons of joy and sorrow. Now, in her 80s, she lived quietly with her memories and her daily routine of simple tasks. Every morning, Chiyo would rise before dawn and sit on her wooden porch, watching the world wake up around her. She would listen to the first birds singing, feel the morning air on her skin, and observe the subtle changes in light as the sun rose over the mountains. This morning sitting had become her favorite part of each day. One morning, as Chiyo sat in her usual spot, a young monk appeared on the path in front of her cottage. He was walking quickly, his face showing signs of worry and frustration. He paused when he saw the old woman and decided to approach her. "Honored grandmother," he said, bowing respectfully, I am traveling to study with different masters, hoping to understand the deepest teachings of Buddhism. I have been walking for many days, and I am still far from my destination. Can you tell me if there are any enlightened teachers in this area? Chio looked at the earnest young man with gentle eyes. What kind of teacher are you seeking? She asked. I want to find someone who has realized the ultimate truth, the monk replied. Someone who can show me how to achieve liberation from suffering. I have studied many texts and practiced various techniques, but I still feel far from enlightenment. Surely there must be a master somewhere who can give me the final teaching I need. The old woman was quiet for a moment, then she smiled softly. Would you like to sit with me for a while? The morning is so beautiful, and you look tired from your journey. The monk was impatient to continue his travels, but something in the woman's peaceful presence made him pause. He sat down on the porch steps beside her. Tell me, Chio said gently, what do you hope to find when you meet this enlightened teacher? I want to understand the nature of reality, the monk answered quickly. I want to know how to be free from attachment and suffering. I want to experience the peace that comes from true awakening. Chio nodded thoughtfully. And how will you know when you have found these things? The question surprised the monk. Well, I suppose I will feel different. More peaceful, more wise. I will know that I understand the deepest truths. I see, the old woman said. She gestured toward the garden in front of her cottage, where vegetables were growing in neat rows. I planted those vegetables in spring, tended them through summer, and now in autumn I harvest what I need each day. When I eat the vegetables, am I experiencing the nature of reality? The monk looked confused. I suppose in a way. But that's just ordinary life. I'm seeking something much deeper than daily activities. Chio smiled and pointed to a small bird that had landed near their feet. This little bird doesn't seem to be suffering from attachment. It takes what it needs and moves on. It doesn't appear to be seeking enlightenment, yet it seems quite free. What do you think it knows that you don't know? The monk watched the bird as it pecked at seeds on the ground, then flew away without hesitation. But that's just instinct. The bird doesn't have consciousness like humans do. Are you sure? Chio asked. How do you know what the bird experiences? And how do you know that your human consciousness is more complicated than it needs to be? They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. The monk found himself naturally relaxing as he watched the simple scene in front of him. Morning light filtered through the trees, a gentle breeze moved through the garden, and the sounds of the waking village created a peaceful backdrop. You know, the monk said slowly, sitting here feels more peaceful than I have felt in months of intensive practice. Chio nodded. What do you think is different about this moment? The monk considered carefully. I'm not trying to achieve anything. I'm not analyzing or seeking. I'm just here. And how does that feel? Natural. Easy. Like I can finally stop pushing so hard. The old woman stood up slowly and began preparing to tend her garden. I have been sitting on this porch every morning for 40 years, she said. I have watched thousands of sunrises, felt thousands of morning breezes, listened to thousands of bird songs. Each morning is the same, and each morning is completely new. She looked at the young monk with eyes full of kindness. You asked about enlightened teachers. I think the morning is your teacher. The bird is your teacher. Your own breath is your teacher. The feeling of peace you just experienced, that is your teacher too. The monk felt something shift inside him. Are you saying that what I'm seeking is already here? I'm not saying anything, Chio replied with a gentle laugh. But what do you think? Right now, in this moment, are you suffering? Are you confused about the nature of reality? Are you failing to experience truth? The monk looked around him with new eyes. The morning light, the peaceful garden, the simple presence of the old woman, his own breathing, the sense of ease in his body. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. It's so simple, he whispered. Yes, Chio agreed. So simple that we often miss it while looking for something complicated. The monk stayed with Chio for 3 days, not to learn special techniques or hear profound teachings, but to practice the art of simple presence. He helped her with daily tasks, sat with her in the morning, and gradually discovered that the peace he had been seeking was available in every ordinary moment when he stopped searching for it elsewhere. When he finally continued his journey, he was no longer looking for an enlightened master. He had learned that enlightenment was not something to be found in a distant place or achieved through special practices. It was the natural state of awareness when it stopped struggling against itself. Years later, the monk would often tell his own students, "The greatest teacher I ever met was an old woman who taught me nothing and gave me everything." This story weaves together all the teachings we have explored on this gentle journey. The young monk's searching represents our own restless seeking for something better, somewhere else, in some future moment. But Chio's simple presence points toward the truth that runs through all Buddhist wisdom. What we seek is already here, already available, already perfect, just as at Island. We have traveled together through teachings about acceptance and letting go, compassion and mindfulness, wisdom and non-attachment. We have discovered that our true nature is not hidden but obvious, not complicated but simple, not distant but present in every breath. Each story has pointed toward the same essential truth. Peace is not something we create, but something we uncover by stopping our struggle against what Island. Like the monk sitting on Chio's porch, we find the deepest rest when we stop trying so hard to find it. We discover the most profound teachings when we become present to the simple reality of this moment. The bird that lands at our feet, the breath that moves through our body, the awareness that experiences these words right now, these are our greatest teachers. Take a long, slow breath and feel how this understanding settles into your body like warm water. You have been seeking peace and wisdom, and they have been here all along. Not as future achievements, but as the natural state of awareness when it relaxes its grip on wanting things to be different. Let us rest in this recognition through one final story that brings us home to the sanctuary of our own peaceful nature. Master Ren had spent 50 years teaching students about Buddhist practice and philosophy. His temple was famous throughout the region, and people would travel great distances to hear his lectures and receive his guidance. He was known for his vast knowledge and his ability to answer even the most complex questions about spiritual matters. But as Master Ren grew older, something began to change in his teaching style. Instead of giving long, elaborate explanations, he started responding to students' questions with simpler and simpler answers. Instead of assigning complex practices, he began suggesting that students simply sit quietly and breathe. Some of his students were confused by this change. They had come expecting profound teachings and sophisticated practices, but their master seemed to be offering them nothing but basic instructions they had learned years earlier. One evening, a senior student approached Master Ren with concern. "Master, your recent teaching seems so different from what you taught us before. Are you feeling well? Have you forgotten the deeper aspects of the Dharma?" Master Ren smiled and invited his student to sit with him on the temple porch where they could watch the evening stars appear in the darkening sky. "Tell me," the master said, "when you first came to study here 10 years ago, what were you seeking?" "I was seeking enlightenment, liberation from suffering, understanding of ultimate reality," the student replied. "And have you found these things?" The student hesitated. "I have learned much and my practice has deepened, but I still feel like there is something more I need to understand or achieve." Master Ren pointed to a bright star that had just become visible in the twilight. "Do you see that star?" "Yes, Master." "What is it doing?" The student looked confused. It's just shining." "Is it trying to shine? Is it working hard to be bright? Is it seeking to become a better star?" "No, it's just naturally shining." "And yet," Master Ren said softly, "its light has traveled across vast distances to reach your eyes. Without any effort or seeking, it illuminates the darkness for anyone who looks up." They sat in peaceful silence, watching as more stars appeared in the clear night sky. "When I was a young teacher," Master Ren continued, "I thought my job was to give students complicated practices and profound insights. I believed that enlightenment was something difficult that required years of special effort. But as I have grown older, I have discovered something different." He gestured toward the field of stars above them. "Look at this perfect teaching that appears every clear night. The stars don't struggle to shine, the sky doesn't effort to be spacious, and the night doesn't try to be peaceful. Yet, here is the most perfect demonstration of Buddha nature anyone could ask for." The student looked up at the stars with new understanding. "You're saying that our true nature is like the stars, naturally luminous without effort?" "I'm not saying anything," Master Ren replied with a gentle laugh. "But what do you experience when you stop trying to figure everything out and simply rest in awareness like the space that holds all these stars?" As they continued sitting together in the quiet night, the student gradually felt his mind settling into a natural stillness. The questions and seeking that usually filled his thoughts seemed to dissolve into the peaceful vastness of the evening. He wasn't trying to meditate or achieve any particular state. He was simply present, like the stars simply shining. "Master," he said quietly, "I think I understand why your teaching has become so simple." "Why is that?" "Because what we're looking for is already so simple that complex teachings only cover it up." Master Ren nodded. "After 50 years of teaching, I have learned that the most profound truth is the most obvious one. Students come seeking complicated wisdom, but what they really need is to remember how to rest in their own natural awareness." He stood up slowly and prepared to go inside for the evening. "The stars have been giving the same teaching every night for millions of years. They shine simply because that's their nature, not because they're trying to achieve anything. When we discover that we too can simply be what we are, without struggling to become something else, we find the peace that has always been available." That night, the student slept more deeply than he had in years. Not because he had learned something new, but because he had finally relaxed into something old and natural and always present. He had discovered that the peace he had been seeking was the peace of awareness itself, not as an achievement, but as his fundamental nature. This final story brings us full circle to where we began, but now with the understanding that comes from having traveled the path. We started our journey together, looking for transformation and peace, and we have found them not as distant goals, but as the ground we have been standing on all along. Feel your body settling deeper now, supported by the surface beneath you. Feel your breathing naturally slowing as your nervous system recognizes the safety of this moment. Feel your mind naturally quieting as it discovers it no longer needs to search for something better somewhere else. You have received the teachings that have guided countless beings toward freedom for over 2,000 years. These ancient wisdoms have found their way to you across vast distances of time and space, like starlight reaching your eyes. They have planted seeds in the fertile ground of your awareness that will continue to grow in their own natural time. There is nothing more you need to do tonight. Nothing to achieve or figure out. The path you have walked with these teachings continues not through effort, but through the simple remembering of what you have always been. Like water finding its natural level, like stars naturally shining, your peace will emerge not through forcing, but through allowing. Our gentle journey through these timeless teachings now draws to a close. We have walked together through stories of acceptance and letting go, compassion and mindfulness, wisdom and freedom. We have discovered that the peace we seek is not somewhere distant, but here, in this very moment, not something to achieve, but something to recognize. The ancient masters who first shared these truths rest with you now in the quiet space of awareness. You carry within you the same Buddha nature that awakened in them centuries ago. These teachings will continue their quiet work as you sleep, settling into the deeper layers of your being like seeds planted in fertile ground. There is nothing more you need to do tonight. Let your body sink completely into rest, knowing that wisdom works best in stillness. Let your breathing slow and deepen naturally as your mind releases the day's concerns. The peace you have touched through these stories is always available, always waiting for your return. Thank you for walking this path with Sleepy Monk. May you rest deeply in the sanctuary of your own peaceful nature. May you wake tomorrow with a gentle remembering of the profound simplicity that lives at your center. Peace comes from within, do not seek it without. Tonight, you have turned inward and found that this ancient truth still holds. The peace you have touched is not dependent on perfect circumstances or the absence of problems. It is the natural state of awareness when it stops fighting against what island. The great Zen masters knew that enlightenment is not something far away that requires years of special effort. It is the simple recognition of what has always been present. Like the moon reflected in still water, your Buddha nature has been shining quietly all along, waiting only for the waves of mental activity to settle. In this stillness, you remember what the ancients called your original face, the pure awareness that existed before you learned to think you were separate from the whole. The middle way that Buddha walked between extremes of luxury and hardship lives in your breath right now, neither forcing nor resisting, simply allowing. The compassion that flows from understanding our shared suffering opens in your heart as you rest. The wisdom of impermanence that teaches us to hold all things lightly settles into your bones. You are not just learning about these teachings. You are becoming them. Rest now in the great silence that holds all sounds, the vast space that embraces all experience. The ancestors smile as another being remembers the way home. It has been a wonderful journey with you here tonight. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.